Imagine being thrown into a war so merciless that survival itself becomes a legend. This isn't just another battlefield story. It's a relentless storm of strategy, betrayal, and raw human will where every clash could be your last. Armies rise, heroes fall, and the line between glory and death disappears in the chaos. If you think you've seen brutal war stories before, prepare yourself, because this one does not hold back. Walm drove his spear into the fallen enemy's throat but didn't let his guard down. The fight wasn't over yet. Another wave of soldiers was already forming. This wasn't some modern war. It was a brutal clash of iron against iron. When the battle finally ended in victory, Walm didn't celebrate like the others. Instead, he felt a heavy guilt for those who had died. Nearby, his squad mates were gathered around a wounded enemy, the man barely clinging to life. They tried to end his suffering but failed to strike the vital spot, leaving him groaning in agony. With a sigh of frustration, Walm stepped forward, pushed them aside, drew his sword, and ended it cleanly. Walm wasn't from this world. He used to be a salaryman named Takakura. On his way to work one morning, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and collapsed. That day, his life as Takakura ended abruptly. But the man who took his second life in a strange new world is now known as Walm. While praying for the fallen, Walm was interrupted by his squadmate Jose, who told him it was time to regroup. On their way back to camp, Jose commended him for killing 9 enemies that day and said he must be proud. W only replied that there was nothing to be proud of. He didn't kill to raise his count. He killed because it was his job. When the state says kill, it's his duty to do so. He's simply fulfilling his role as a soldier. Jose mocked him for being too serious, and they left the battlefield for camp. That night, while Walm was eating rations, someone put an arm around his shoulder. It was their squad leader, Duel. He was drunk, praising Walm for taking down 9 enemies, but bragging that he still won because he killed 15. Walm just played along, saying he could never beat the leader. Then someone cut into their conversation, saying the only reason Duel won was because he had a skill. He added that magic was one thing, but skills were just a cheat. Jose introduced them, their new recruits, Barreto and Nor. The squad leader pointed at Barreto and said it wasn't a cheat since it was his own power. The two started arguing. Nor then asked if it was true that the squad leader's skill could cut through any armor. Duel grinned, flexed his muscles, and said it was true. Walm and Jose started talking about the difference between magic and skills. Jose said the squad leader's skill was no joke. He alone could turn the tide of war. He admitted he wanted a skill himself because it could make him rich, then asked Walm what he'd rather have, magic or a skill. Walm took a sip of liquor before answering that if he could get one for free, he'd choose magic. They both glanced at the bald magic user from their squad, Willard, and Walm said magic sure was something nice to dream about. Jose made a face and immediately called out to the squad leader, saying dreams now were coming from a guy so serious he even used full force against a kid. The squad leader, worried, asked if Walm had hit his head or something since that wasn't like him at all. Walm just closed his eyes and ignored the two as they kept talking. Later that night, the squad leader got serious and told the whole squad that from now on they'd be fighting non-stop battles, and starting tomorrow, their next opponent would be mired. Today's battle was just the appetizer. Their real target was mired, and all forces were ordered to gather at Saria City. From tomorrow on, they'd be marching to war again. It would be unlike anything they'd faced before, a massive battle. Duel urged everyone to prepare themselves. Walm remembered when he was a new recruit on the battlefield. Back then, he'd hesitated to kill a soldier begging for mercy. While he hesitated, an enemy crept up behind him and nearly struck, but the squad leader and Jose saved him, yelling that it wasn't the time to daydream. That same voice now told him not to daydream again. They had arrived at Saria City. As they walked through the streets, Duel told them they just had to wait until tomorrow. Jose invited Walm to drink with them. Along the way, Walm noticed a malnourished young woman selling herself on the street. Beggars and prostitutes filled the road, and Jose warned them to be careful. The woman grabbed Walm by the cloth and offered herself, but he refused. She looked down in despair. Seeing that, Walm took out his pouch and gave her some money for food. The woman teared up, thanked him, and ran into an alley. Jose told Walm not to feed them too much. If word got out, beggars would swarm him. He told him not to let his good nature get the best of him. Walm nodded and said he'd be careful next time. Jose was surprised. Despite Walm being so bloodthirsty in battle, he still had a soft side. He reminded him that no matter what, they were just soldiers. Seeing the poverty around him reminded Walm of when he first came to this world. His family couldn't survive on farming alone, which was why he became a soldier. Without that choice, his parents, siblings, and he would have ended up like the beggars in the streets. Duel then told them about Saria City's history. It used to be a fertile land. 5 years ago, it was still part of the Kanoa Kingdom, not Highserk territory. But Kanoa began fortifying its borders and clashing with Highserk. At first, Due was surprised they even managed to win and defend a village. He remembered realizing that the beans he often ate were considered cattle feed here. This land had once been rich with wide fields, good harvests, and plenty of food. Jose asked what happened. Due explained that the Mjard Grand Duke was a former Kanoa noble who betrayed Kanoa during the war, siding with the Fious kingdom. The combined Fious and Mjard armies crushed Kanoa's lands, invading and burning everything in their path until the kingdom was ruined. The Grand Duke seized the territory, and Mjard became an independent nation. The land turned desolate because the country had been sold out to its neighbors. The Highserk Empire delayed its counterattack for years due to a lack of troops. The hatred Kanoa's people held for Mjard and Fious ran deeper than their grudge against Highserk, deep enough that they joined sides in the invasion of Mjard. They arrived at the tavern and Due told the two that the drinks would be on him tonight. They had a toast for the upcoming invasion war. Walm dipped his bread in the soup and was surprised at how delicious it was. He had thought he'd had enough bean soup for a lifetime, but tasting this changed his mind. The three of them drank happily until midnight. Walm, on the verge of vomiting, excused himself. When he was gone, Jose told the squad leader that he's always like this before a war. Outside, leaning on the wall, Walm reflected on what he had done today. He felt conflicted and thought of himself as a hypocrite and a murderer. The next morning, the army gathered at the training hall. On the podium stood the commander of the invasion, Gerard Berger. He hyped the army, calling them the symbol of bravery of their empire. With this bravery, he said they would finally end the 5-year war. He told them not to be afraid to trample their enemies and to show them who they declared war against. With a loud roar, he screamed, "Kill them all!" The army cheered, raising their weapons. Walm thought about how he would be killing again, but quickly reminded himself that it's kill or be killed. Jose asked why he looked so pale, but Walm replied that it was just a hangover. Jose, worried, told him that if something was bothering him, he was happy to listen. The Empire's army then departed from Saria City and was divided into 3 large troops. All routes leading to Mjard territory were targeted for capture, particularly the huge fort that blocked the main road guarded by 3,000 soldiers. Due's squad was assigned to that fort, Saria's paramount fort. Due gathered everyone and gave directions. While Walm was smoking by a tree, Jose grabbed Barrito's balls to ease the tension. He then went close to Nor, but Walm stepped forward and warned him that he would not tolerate any form of brutality against women. Jose then told the 2 recruits that this would be their first real castle siege. They would be thrown onto the front lines, and newcomers could easily die in hand-to-hand combat. But he assured them that if an enemy came, Walm would handle it. He said Walm was a professional who could kill dozens with a plain expression. Walm told Jose not to portray him as some battle maniac, though he didn't want to see newcomers die either. Nor still couldn't help but feel nervous, but decided to trust Walm anyway. Moments later, the war horn sounded. The battle had begun. Due slapped Walm on the back and tried to motivate him. The army started marching toward the castle wall. The soldiers held large shields big enough to cover several people while also carrying sacks of dirt. The enemy fired volleys of arrows at them, and one arrow in particular was far stronger than the others and decimated a soldier's head. Due warned everyone that the enemy had a skill user who used hard shoot. Walm cursed the situation and told Nor to stay close to the shield if she wanted to live. The soldiers hurried toward the wall, but as they got closer, the enemy began bombarding them with different kinds of magic. While holding the shield, Walm cracked a joke to lift morale. Surprisingly, it worked. Due, pissed off, hurled a large rock that hit the skill user in the head. He then ordered everyone to quickly surround the wall. They immediately piled up the soil they carried to reach the rampart, some even using earth magic to speed up the process. Nor told Walm that the walls hadn't been surrounded yet and asked if they were still going to climb. But then an order came from the battalion commander, an all-out attack to break through the walls. They set up ladders and the soldiers charged, climbing toward their deaths. Walm told Nor to stay close, but as the soldiers reached the top, the enemy greeted them with spears. One soldier aimed his bow at Walm, but Willard, the bald magic user, covered for him, launching an ice spike into the enemy's face. When Walm finally reached the top, he swung his sword, killing one enemy instantly. Shock spread among the soldiers. He quickly moved to another opponent who deflected his attack and tried to counter, but Walm blocked it with his shield and stabbed the soldier in the face. The man fell and screamed, terrifying the enemies around him. Then he heard Nor call for help. She was about to be killed by a knight wielding a halberd. Walm acted fast and threw his shield, but the knight cut it in 2. Walm was surrounded, but he still taunted the knight, saying he was only good against new recruits. The bait worked and the knight charged at him. Walm barely dodged the attack and tried to counter, but his strike didn't even leave a dent in the knight's armor. The knight grazed Walm's arm, drawing blood. Walm knew that if he took too long, the knight would kill Nor. Normally, someone like this would be fighting their squad leader, but duel couldn't reach the rampart because of the chaos below. Walm had no choice but to take down the knight himself. Before he could plan, the knight charged again. Walm dodged, took a deep breath, and readied his stance. He rushed forward, but because of the knight's longer reach, Walm was wounded in the shoulder. The knight followed with another stab, grazing Walm's cheek. The knight sensed something strange. His halberd should have hit Walm's eye, but it missed. Then he saw a faint magical barrier surrounding Walm. Power surged through Walm's body, and his sword suddenly felt light. The knight charged again, but Walm met his attack head-on, slashing through the knight's shield and arm in one blow. The knight could only ask why Walm was laughing maniacally as he fell. The enemy soldiers froze in fear. They had just watched an ordinary soldier defeat their commander. A large explosion erupted behind them. Duel's squad had broken through. The enemy's morale collapsed, and now they were being surrounded. Walm ran to Nor, asked if she was okay, and checked her wound. Seeing it wasn't deep, he told her to be careful since the battle wasn't over yet. Walm took a shield from a corpse and rejoined Duel's squad. He charged into the enemy lines, cutting through them easily. He couldn't help but test his newfound power. After the enemies on the rampart were massacred, Duel and Jose commended Walm, glad that he had gained a skill. Jose told Walm to rest and leave the rest to them. Nor called out to him and thanked him for saving her. She said she could return to the front lines again. Walm smiled, just happy she was safe. Later, Walm sat down and sighed in relief that he made it out alive. He rested, surrounded by corpses. Shortly after, the fort surrendered. The battle that began in the morning ended just before sunset. And yet, this was only the outpost at the border. Walm's job was far from over. A few days later, Duel's squad found themselves deep in the forest investigating an attack on their supply line. The attackers reportedly had 2 magic users with them. Nor asked if what she was seeing was also caused by magic. Before them lay the corpse of a Highserk soldier, half of his face crushed. It had been a few days since the siege, and some enemy troops had managed to escape, starting guerrilla warfare along the forest roads. The Highserk army on its way to the Mjard capital was forced to halt, suffering heavy losses in both supplies and soldiers. Walm studied the corpse and knew right away it wasn't done with a halberd. Duel told him it was caused by a shield, meaning the person responsible had a skill. Duel explained it could be someone with the iron wall skill. With that, even a wooden shield could hit like solid iron, and if you were struck by it, you'd end up like the poor man before them. Walm grew uneasy. They'd be facing both a magic user and a skill user, and Mjard was clearly willing to use people like that in their ambushes. Jose added that an entire company had already gone out to find them but had lost 30 men instead. The enemy should have been defeated by now, yet they remained stubborn. As they walked, Walm lit a cigarette, blowing out a puff of smoke, and asked Jose if the smell of tobacco could give them away. Jose laughed, saying their stench was probably stronger than the smoke anyway. Burrito joked that maybe they should wear perfume instead. Duel laughed and told him to wear a skirt too, saying maybe the enemy would show up faster. Walm couldn't help but smile at their banter. Then Nor pointed ahead and asked what that was. It was a decomposing corpse hanging from a tree. Jose explained that they were forest people who had sold information to the Mjard troops. Nor wavered at the sight, disturbed by the brutality. Walm told her about his rookie days, how he also wasn't used to seeing things like this. That changed when dozens of his friends were killed by people just like them. Still, Nor couldn't help but feel bad. Walm sighed and took another drag from his cigarette. Burrito asked if they'd get to keep the loot once they wiped out the enemies who attacked the caravan. Jose told him it wouldn't be easy, saying it would be like fighting both Duel and Walm at once. As they kept joking around, a loud explosion suddenly echoed nearby, snapping everyone to attention. Walm crushed his cigarette and readied his halberd. Jose shouted that the enemy was about 300 meters away. Duel ordered everyone to attack from the right and flank them. The squad dashed toward the explosion and caught the enemy soldiers off guard. Walm struck first, cleaving one soldier's head in half with his halberd, then lunged at another and stabbed him in the neck. While fighting, Jose noticed something and shouted that the enemy troops were being led by adventurers. Adventurers, people who fought demons and cleared dungeons, were far better equipped than normal soldiers. No wonder the Mjard troops were so skilled at guerrilla tactics. Now only the elite knights remained. Duel faced off against an adventurer with the iron wall skill and asked why the guild was interfering in the war when they had declared neutrality. The shield-bearing adventurer answered that they had joined of their own free will. Meanwhile, Walm sensed something coming and instinctively dodged a wind blade from a magic user. He spotted her, a kid, one of the adventurers. He hesitated for a moment but then steeled himself. Magic users were too dangerous to let live. He charged forward, cutting down two enemy soldiers who tried to stop him, slicing the arms off one and stabbing the other in the back. The second soldier fell, begging for help from the adventurer, but Walm told him to give up. No one was coming. He finished him off. The magic user stood frozen, horrified. "How can you kill so easily?" she asked. Walm paused, glancing down at the Highserk corpse near her feet, and scoffed. "On the battlefield, you do what you have to. I'm sure you've killed your share too." He readied his halberd. On the verge of tears, the girl sent another wind blade his way. Walm slid under it and countered, swinging his halberd down, but she raised her shield in time. It didn't matter. Using his skill, Walm split her shield in two and slashed her arm. She fell to the ground, trembling. He walked toward her slowly as she struggled to get up. "Just give up already," he said. Terrified, she lashed out wildly, backing away until she tripped over a corpse. Walm disarmed her easily and mocked her to at least remember where the corpses she killed were. With no weapon left, she squeezed her eyes shut as he raised his halberd to finish her, but something made his instincts scream. Walm spun and blocked an incoming strike just in time, barely saving himself. He leapt back and clicked his tongue. It was another adventurer, a man named El. He shouted for the girl to stay back. That's when Walm realized the girl was actually their leader. Walm sighed, muttering that he hated this, then lunged at El. The man dodged and slipped behind him, using wind magic to boost his movement. Walm caught on fast. This guy was using body acceleration magic. They clashed steel against steel. Walm smirked. "You sure you want me as your opponent?" He taunted. Walm's rage bait worked. While they traded blows, the other adventurers struggled against his squad. Jose had nearly overpowered the iron wall user. El tried to finish their fight quickly so he could help his friends, but Walm had already adapted to his movements and dodged everything with ease. Then the adventurers' leader yelled for the others to evade. Willet's fireball hit, burning a bow-wielding adventurer. El screamed her name, enraged, and attacked Walm again, calling him a monster. Walm sneered. "You're no different, you killed too." Enraged again, El struck wildly. Walm parried and stabbed him in the shoulder, pinning him against a tree. Drawing his short sword, Walm prepared to finish him. The girl couldn't believe what was happening. In the blink of an eye, her friends were about to die. In panic, she unleashed another wind blade, far stronger than before. Walm stepped back just in time. Behind him, a tree shattered in half and his arm was shredded with cuts. He froze. Her magic blade was hidden. Sweating, Walm saw her eyes filled with killing intent. She fired again, her magic output spiking off the charts. Walm dove aside, but several Highserk soldiers weren't so lucky. They were sliced apart instantly. Duel shouted for everyone to scatter. The forest was torn apart by her magic. When the storm of wind finally died down, Walm crawled out from cover. The adventurers were gone. Duel told them not to pursue. The remaining enemy troops had been wiped out, and they would resume their march toward the Mjard capital. Walm looked down at his wounded arm, reflecting on the battle. The adventurers were skilled. If they had been used to killing, his squad would have been the one dead. He remembered the girl's words and muttered quietly, "I don't kill because I want to." Elsewhere in the forest, the girl fled, crying, haunted by Walm's words and the look in his eyes. A few days later, Duel's squad found themselves resting by the river. Willet walked over to Walm and told him to grab his hand. The request caught Walm off guard. Willet explained that he'd heard Walm was interested in magic, and since they had time to spare, it was the perfect moment to learn and he'd be the one to teach him. Walm's eyes lit up. He eagerly took Willet's hand, saying he wanted to learn. While they held hands, Nor asked Jose what they were doing. Jose explained that Willet was transferring magical energy to Walm to see if he had any aptitude for magic. If he did, he might one day be able to cast fireballs or water spears like Willet. With a grin, Jose decided to tease them, calling the pair a gay couple. Walm shot him a murderous glare, and Jose quickly said he was joking. Willet, annoyed, told Walm to focus. Walm concentrated and felt a cold sensation spreading through his hand. Willet said it was normal and told him to stay conscious and focused. Then he told Walm to let go of his hand, focus on his palms, and picture something that flows, a river, an ocean, anything. Walm imagined rain and water began to form in his hands. Excited, he showed it to Willet, only for Willet to click his tongue and say it wasn't very good. Still, he admitted it was a usable amount, enough for a human well. When Walm looked around, he noticed the entire squad watching them. Duel announced proudly that they now had 2 human wells. Walm broke into a sweat at the thought of producing water for everyone. Willet warned him to be careful using his magic. If he wasn't, he might end up draining himself dry. He also explained that compared to his own skill-based magic, Water magic used far less mana. Walm was shocked. He hadn't realized he'd been using magic all along. Willett explained that both magic and skills rely on magical power. Elemental spells like fireballs and water spears are considered magic because they draw mana directly, while techniques like power attack or iron wall use mana to strengthen the body or weapon. Those are called skills. Willett was baffled that Walm didn't know this, but Walm told him he'd grown up as an illiterate farmer under military rule. Willett ignored it, then said it was time to test his fire aptitude. Walm closed his eyes to concentrate, but the sounds of his squadmates splashing nearby made it hard to focus. Willett noticed too late that the fire forming in Walm's palm was growing rapidly. Panic spread. Walm asked what he should do as the squad backed away in fear, convinced he was about to burn the camp down. Burrito's mohawk suddenly caught fire and Nor shoved it into the ground and put it out, begging for mercy. Walm swore it wasn't on purpose, but Willett was already approaching menacingly. A huge water orb formed in Willett's hand and slammed into Walm, launching him 12 feet before he crashed into the river. Soaked and fuming, Walm shouted that what Willett threw was no joke, but Willett ignored him and pulled him out. With a wild look in his eyes, Willett said they would continue the aptitude test. Walm shrieked out of fear, but eventually found that he had a strong affinity for wind and a weak one for earth. Moments later, a messenger from the fious arrived with orders from Captain Ligurian. The plan, he said, was insane. Duel's squad would merge with the main battalion and face the Mjard and fious army on the plains of Raref. Meanwhile, in the fious camp, commanders were busy planning their next move. Both the Mjard and fious stronghold stood on separate hills, giving each side a strong defensive position. One of the advisors explained that judging from the Highserk army's formation, they were likely aiming to strike the Mjard stronghold first, while sending a smaller force to pin down the fious troops, everything unfolding just as predicted. The Lord of Fious, Winston, found it hard to believe that only a small number of Highserk soldiers could hold back his 6,000 men. Leaving his tent, he studied the enemy's positioning through the haze of campfire smoke and saw no clear weaknesses. He decided to let the Mjard forces wear each other down before sending his own troops in to finish off whoever was left. Even the famed Jeff Cavalry Battalion would fall once exhausted. He raised the morale of his soldiers, calling on them to fight with pride and emerge victorious for their king. Soon after, the Highserk army began to move. The combined forces of Mjard and fious numbered 25,000 facing 15,000 Highserk troops. The war horn sounded. Duel's squad remained on standby. Watching the Mjard soldiers bracing for battle, Jose commented that they looked unusually fierce today, probably because they were on home court advantage. Duel agreed, adding that Mjard must have called for fious to deal with the Highserk threat directly. Nor, confused, asked why they were still waiting when the battle had already begun. Walm glanced at Duel and noticed him sweating, which made him uneasy. Duel finally explained the plan. First, the Highserk army would attack the Mjard stronghold. While that unfolded, the deciding move would take place. The Ligurian battalion, including Duel's squad, would charge together with Jeff's cavalry battalion. Walm was stunned. Even Jose, usually the joker, turned serious, saying that a cavalry and infantry charge side by side was reckless. He asked why their unit was chosen for such a suicide run. Duel replied that it was because the Ligurian battalion had the most combat experience. Burrito, terrified, asked if things were really that bad. Duel told him straight it was. They would be running alongside horses, and if their hearts pounded or their legs gave out, they couldn't stop because if they did, the soldiers behind would trample them. In short, if you stop, you die, and even while running, you'd still have to kill whoever stood in front of you. Duel added that their squad was placed on the front line because of Walm's rampage back at the fort. Walm was taken aback and protested, saying Duel rampaged more often than him, which made Duel look away awkwardly. Jose tried to lighten the mood, saying it couldn't be helped. Their squad had 2 skill users and Willett's magic on top of that. Duel sighed, remembering the meeting with the commander who told him, "I'm expecting a lot from you." Walm turned to look at the cavalry and wondered if they could really keep up with them. The thought of surviving such a charge felt impossible. As he worried, Duel muttered that the attack orders still hadn't arrived and wondered if something had gone wrong with the vanguard. Maybe the plan wasn't unfolding as intended. That only made Walm more anxious. Duel tried to reassure everyone, saying there was no way Commander Berger would misread the situation. Then, from a distance, they saw it, the main fious army charging down toward the battlefield, mowing through the vanguard lines. Burrito started to panic, and Nor shouted for new orders. Things grew even worse when the Mjard reserve forces began charging from the hill, turning the situation grim. Finally, the attack order arrived, but to their shock, the target was the fious stronghold instead of the Mjard one. Confusion swept through the ranks. This wasn't what the plan called for. Before they could question it, Jeff's cavalry battalion had already taken off, thundering toward the fious stronghold. The soldiers had no choice but to follow. Walm closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and steeled himself. Then he started running, joining the suicide. While running, Walm was panting hard, surrounded by the sounds of crashing steel and splattering blood. Infantry charged alongside the cavalry. It was chaos. They had to keep running, fighting enemies in front of them without breaking stride. Walm lunged at an enemy soldier ahead, driving his halberd through the man's chest. His body wobbled from fatigue, but he forced himself to keep moving. They were now heading up the hill toward the fious stronghold. As they ran, Duel shouted over the noise that he finally understood the plan. The Highserk army had pretended to falter on purpose, baiting the enemy to attack there. The original plan, they'd been told, was just a bluff, a trap. Their allies had been used as decoys, drawing most of the enemy into a fight with Highserk's main force, leaving the fious headquarters with far fewer defenders. Their real mission was now clear. Destroy the fious command before the Highserk main army collapsed. Victory depended on it, but the climb up the hill wasn't smooth. Even with fewer soldiers defending it, the slope was littered with spear walls and horse barricades. Duel ordered Walm and Willat to use their magic. Flames flared in their palms. Fireballs hurled forward, exploding across the barricades and tearing open a gap in the enemy's line. With the defenses blown apart, the guards at the front were overwhelmed and cut down. Duel's squad then rushed to push aside the anti-cavalry fences blocking the path. Using every bit of strength they had left, they toppled the barriers just as Jeff's cavalry battalion came charging from the distance. Jose immediately shouted for everyone to clear the way before they were trampled. The soldiers moved aside and the cavalry thundered through, crushing the remaining defenders as they stormed toward the fious headquarters. The infantry followed close behind. One Highserk soldier who fell and couldn't get up was trampled underfoot by the wave of men charging forward. Walm's throat burned dry from exhaustion. Duel yelled over the roar of battle that this was still just the beginning. The enemies they'd fought so far were mixed with non-militia, but from here on near the fious stronghold, they'd be facing the main army, the real soldiers. Before Walm could respond, someone attacked him mid-sentence. He managed to block, but the strike was so strong it forced him back. The attacker, a mounted warrior clad in distinctive armor, cut down multiple soldiers in a single charge. Walm realized this wasn't a regular knight. It was one of the fious royal guards. That meant the general had to be nearby. Walm tried to provoke him, and the guard took the bait, charging straight at him. Their weapons clashed, but the royal guard's strength was overwhelming. Walm barely dodged the next strike and stumbled back. The guard looked stunned that Walm had survived his attack. Meanwhile, Duel's squad was locked in combat with other enemies. It felt endless. Jose shouted that a group on the left flank was retreating. Duel glanced over and saw them. "That's the fious general," he yelled, asking for anyone to back him up. But everyone was tied up in their own fights. The enemy soldiers were buying time for their general to escape. Duel cursed, splitting another foe in half. Back on Walm's side, Walm met the royal guard's next strike with his skill. But it wasn't enough. The blow sent him flying 18 FT before he crashed hard into the ground. Somehow he still stood back up, glaring at the royal guard with killing intent. He knew a simple fireball wouldn't work. These royal guards didn't fear death. As long as they held the hill, the squad wouldn't reach the enemy headquarters, and if the general escaped, they'd lose everything. Walm made up his mind. He'd burn it all. He started gathering every drop of mana he could, combining fire and wind. The enemy soldiers noticed and rushed him, but Duel's squad stepped in to hold them off. Flames began to swirl around Walm, crackling and twisting. Jose shouted for everyone to fall back. The royal guard felt a chill run through him and charged in desperation. Willat yelled for Walm to do it. Walm released everything. A vortex of blue fire erupted around him, expanding outward in a roaring spiral. The royal guard's sword and horse melted in an instant, his armor fusing into his flesh as the heat consumed him. Everything around Walm turned to ash. Back in Winston's tent, one of his advisors urged him to flee. It was too dangerous to stay. If the general died, the entire army would fall apart. But Winston only called the man an idiot. He refused to abandon the stronghold. Before the advisor could argue, a wounded soldier stumbled into the tent, gasping that the anti-cavalry fence had been broken through. They had no choice but to move. As they rushed out, the tent collapsed behind them. Winston froze, shocked by what he saw. He remembered what his teacher once told him, that when blue fire appears, it's the bonfire to the netherworld. If you're invited, death is waiting. Ignis Fatuus is what it's called, he muttered. There stood Walm alone, surrounded by a sea of blue flames consuming the entire camp. Walm stared straight at Winston and muttered under his breath, "The next attack is just for you." Winston steeled himself and faced Walm. He ridiculed the soldier's arrogance before revealing who he truly was, the commander of the fious force. At first, Walm thought, this must be a body double, but the glare coming from Winston erased all doubt. He told Winston to surrender. There was no point in killing him. A royal prisoner would be far more valuable to Highserk. But Winston shook his head. He still had his limbs, his sword, his pride, and his soldiers were still fighting. There was no reason for him to surrender. Winston charged forward, and Walm barely dodged the strike, gritting his teeth. He thought about what Winston had said and realized the man meant every word. If Walm had been a second slower, that would have been a fatal blow. He had underestimated him. Winston wasn't just a noble with a title. He was a real commander and strong at that. Walm was at a clear disadvantage. His body was worn down from the non-stop fighting, his mana almost gone after summoning the blue flames. He couldn't use skills or magic anymore. Every move he made was slower, heavier. Winston struck again, catching him off guard. Walm barely dodged and tried to counter with a stab, but Winston parried easily and slashed his arm. Blood ran down his sleeve. There was no opening. Desperate, Walm threw his halberd. Winston deflected it. In that instant of distraction, Walm rushed in, drawing the short sword at his waist. Winston tried to guard, but it was too late. The blade sliced halfway through his neck. Blood spurted as Winston collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. With his final strength, he murmured that though they had lost the battle, his kingdom had not fallen. A moment later, his eyes went still. Walm raised his voice, declaring the fall of the fious commander. A roar erupted from the Highserk soldiers as enemy morale shattered. The Highserk troops charged forward, cutting down the fleeing men. Walm stood catching his breath. Nearby, one of Winston's advisors knelt beside the body, tears streaming down his face. Then, without hesitation, he drew his sword and slit his own throat. Walm could only stare, speechless at the grim sight. Soon after, the commander of Jeff's cavalry battalion arrived and confirmed the kill. Jeff commended Walm for his efforts and asked about his unit. Walm identified himself as a member of Kazuru platoon under Duwei's squad. Jeff placed a hand on his shoulder, promised he'd be rewarded handsomely, and advised him not to die before receiving it. Then he rode off with his cavalry to pursue the fleeing enemy. Jose soon found Walm, asking if he was still standing. Walm admitted he was utterly exhausted, and Jose told him that feeling tired was proof he was still alive. Walm asked about the others, and Jose assured him they were battered but alive. Moments later, their squad leader Duwei appeared, covered in cuts and bruises but still ready to fight. Walm looked out across the battlefield, smoke rising, fire spreading, and bodies scattered everywhere. The victory over Fious and Mjard had come at a terrible cost, but it marked the nearing end of the war. Meanwhile, on another hill, the Mjard stronghold was surrounded. Its commander, a former Canon noble who had betrayed his homeland, saw there was no escape. He tried to surrender, but before he could, his guard was struck down. Soldiers of Saria, once his own countrymen, now allied with Highserk, charged in, driven by vengeance. The foolish duke who sold out his own country, all he could whisper was, "I'm sorry." Spears pierced his body again and again, and when the rage subsided, his corpse was displayed on the battlefield. After the Highserk defeated the allied forces of Mjard and Fious, the army advanced to Edinburgh, the capital of Mjard, on foot. Walm and his group were ordered to maintain peace and order in the city. The Duwei squad found themselves in the former Mjard Duke's mansion. Burrito, worried, asked Jose what their squad leader Duwei did to get invited to such a residence. Jose replied that he didn't know but thought they didn't have any ulterior motives. Duwei heard this and asked everyone if they thought he had made some mistake, to which they replied with a hesitant no, probably. Walm, on the other hand, believed they would receive a reward for their huge accomplishment. A butler arrived and poured everyone tea. The squad was confused about how to drink it since such drinks were only enjoyed by royalty. Everyone tried their best to drink it with proper manners, except Willat, who didn't touch his tea at all. Walm was overjoyed to come across such a fine product. He didn't know the manners of this world, but still remembered those from his previous one. Walm drank the tea elegantly, leaving the squad confused. He was on the verge of tears from experiencing such a refined taste after so many years. The squad called Walm a son of a, annoyed by his smirk, thinking he was trying to embarrass them. Nor even asked Walm if he was sure he was just a farmer. Then the door suddenly opened, and their commander, Gerald Berger, finally arrived. The whole squad stood to greet him, but the commander told them to take a seat since they couldn't have a conversation standing up. Gerald Berger was a war hero of the Highserk. After taking a sip of his tea, he told the squad he was surprised to hear it wasn't the Jeff cavalry that killed Winston, but an infantry unit from Duwei's squad. He commended them and said that was why they had been called there, to be rewarded directly. Duel used formal language with the commander, leaving the entire squad speechless. The commander praised Duel, calling him a treasure of their country, then turned his attention to Walm, catching him off guard. He listed Walm's history. 6 months after joining the battalion, he had trained in battles near the border. Walm had become a powerful asset for his squad leader, and had even learned magic from Willat, later developing Ignis Fatuus, an excellent talent, the commander said. Walm lowered his head and thanked him. The commander said he was glad Walm was a soldier of Highserk, noting that anyone else would have been burned and killed by that blue fire. Throughout history, those who possessed that ability were either famous heroes or outstanding adventurers. The commander wondered if Walm was the same. He then told his assistant to bring the item, a demon mask familiar to Walm, as it resembled something from his former world. The commander explained the mask was originally worn by a group of otherworlders who rampaged against the 3 major nations. There were many mysteries surrounding the mask, but the original owner could also use Ignis Fatuus like Walm. He told Walm to try it on. "Splendid," he said. "The mask suits you perfectly." Walm felt a strange sense of déjà vu as if connected to his original world. The commander said all his enemies would fear the mask. After Walm removed it, the mask started vibrating violently, startling him and the squad while the commander laughed. Nor quickly pointed out that the mask was cursed. Worried, Walm asked the laughing commander, who replied there was no need to worry. The mask had simply taken a liking to him. He explained it sometimes harmonized with emotions and trembled, but hadn't caused any harm yet. With a serious expression, the commander said some weapons developed a will of their own, and this mask was particularly picky. It was good that it had found a suitable owner. As the squad left the mansion and walked down the hallway, Jose asked Walm what he would do with the mask. Walm replied that since he had received it from the commander, he would cherish it. Noor, shocked, asked why he wasn't going to throw it away, and the mask immediately started vibrating again. Duel and Jose, scared, quickly scolded Noor, who hastily apologized to the mask. It stopped vibrating. The mask truly had a will of its own. Outside the mansion, Noor pointed out the mountain of Mjard soldiers' corpses. Jose replied that all of them had rushed to this place. To soldiers who had lost their lord, this must have seemed like a treasure trove. He added, more serious than usual, that even with wealth and power, everything could crumble in an instant. Walm still thought it was pathetic to die just to get hold of wealth. Duel shared the same sentiment, believing loyalty had driven them to their deaths. According to surviving servants, insurgents had killed the Mjard kin before the Highserk army arrived. As the squad walked through the streets, Walm noticed the death toll was still rising. Edinburgh was under martial law. Walm and his group were ordered to maintain public order, which included finding Mjard soldiers hiding in the city, arresting those who disobeyed martial law or looted, and punishing them to ensure smooth operations. One civilian was dragged in front of his family, begging that he wasn't a soldier but a higher-ranking soldier called his bluff, pointing out a fresh arrow wound on his back. The man was dragged away and forced to work for a few months. Walm wondered if he really was a soldier but kept walking until Burrito heard a struggle nearby. When they investigated, Walm's eyes widened. Some Highserk soldiers had broken into a house, assaulted the woman inside, and beaten her husband to death. The rampaging soldiers were soon restrained by others. Walm asked what would happen to them. A high-ranking officer replied that normally the crime would mean decapitation, but since they had just won the war, they'd probably only be whipped. Walm couldn't contain his anger and asked if the officer really thought whipping was enough punishment. Duel intervened, saying that getting whipped was far from easy, catching Walm off guard. He explained that soldiers scream from the first lash. By the second and third, they start crying. Their skin peels, flesh tears. Even if they pass out, they wake for the next lash. Duel's words terrified the assaulters, making them sweat profusely, but he continued to stare at them. Walm calmed down. The officer told the offenders to follow the squad leader's advice, and if they wanted their lashes reduced, they should quietly turn themselves in. Duel placed a hand on Walm's shoulder and walked away. Walm could only look down. Later that night, the Duel squad camped near a river. Walm sat alone, smoking, drinking, and eating by himself. He watched the 2 moons above, a reminder he was in another world. Feeling sleepy, he heard a sound from the nearby inland port. He quickly went there and called out. When there was no answer, Walm unsheathed his sword, preparing for a possible Mjard straggler. He called out again, and 2 figures emerged, an old man and a young woman. Walm asked who they were, since they were Highserk soldiers. Using fire to illuminate them, the old man explained they were leaving because the city was full of thieves and ruffians. They wanted to seek refuge with relatives abroad. Walm examined them. They looked like civilians, but he had doubts. He asked the old man about his military background. The old man replied he had fought in a war 10 years ago but was now retired. Walm didn't believe him, noting his strong physical condition and the young lady's soft hands. He suspected they were nobles in disguise. The mood grew tense until a low growl came from the young lady's stomach. Her face flushed red with embarrassment. Walm, caught off guard, laughed and apologized, saying he couldn't help it. He warned her she might get kidnapped by bad soldiers and told them that when their home was safe, they should return. He would let them go this time. As they walked away, Walm called them back, making the old man tense, but he only wanted to give them leftover food since the young lady was hungry. They were shocked. Walm explained he'd had a rough day and was only doing it to lessen his guilt, calling himself a hypocrite. The young lady accepted the food and thanked him. Walm watched them board a boat and disappear. He didn't know that letting them go would haunt him for the rest of his life. Later, the old man and young lady arrived at their destination. The young lady broke down crying, saying her father, mother, everyone was dead, blaming herself. The old man comforted her, telling Rita, the young lady, that there were still things ahead and they would reclaim their land. It was revealed that Rita was the daughter of the Duke of Mjard, the one who had been speared to death. 2 months later, Duel was yelling like crazy alongside the other soldiers, all shouting and making noise in front of a castle. The soldiers continued to make noise, striking their shields with their swords and even sounding horns. The enemy at the top of the castle walls couldn't stand the clamor. Duel ordered everyone to get louder. The enemies grew more frustrated each day, but they couldn't retaliate as the higher army remained out of arrow range. After each noisy display, the soldiers returned to their camp. Following the siege of Mjard's capital, Edinburgh, the Highserk army marched straight toward Fious. Because Fious had supported Mjard's forces in the recent war, their border defenses were now severely weakened, and Duel wasn't about to overlook such a vulnerability. The army split into 2 groups. The first consisted of 4 battalions ordered to invade the inland district, while the second, made up of 2 battalions, surrounded the various forces to prevent the main body from being flanked. Walm, part of the Ligurian battalion, belonged to the second group. Their target was the Refin mine near the border. When Barreto asked when they had become acquired, Duel laughed and said it was because they were seizing the mines. They had cornered about 3,000 Fious soldiers inside their forts, which now formed multiple defensive lines. To make matters worse, the enemy held the high ground. Taking even one fort would demand immense effort, and it might not even be worth it. That's why the higher soldiers repeatedly launched harassing fire, forcing the defenders back to their forts. First, they'd break their spirit, then they'd attack and finish the job. Barreto joked that the enemies were asking for an encore, and the soldiers laughed as insults rained down from the walls. In short, they were waiting for the enemy to starve out. Walm couldn't help but enjoy this operation. Compared to their previous battles, it felt almost relaxing. 2 weeks later, the choir had become routine. With so much free time, Duel ordered everyone to train. Inside an abandoned mining tunnel, Walm practiced under Willat's supervision because he couldn't control his magic properly. There was always a risk of harming allies. His Ignis Fatuus wasn't normal. In the worst case, it could incinerate an entire platoon. Willat said the abandoned tunnel was perfect for practicing control. Walm sat inside while Willat waited outside watching. As Walm tried to recreate the sensation from before, the tunnel was suddenly engulfed in blue fire. The flames were so intense that even Willat, standing outside, barely dodged the burst. Meanwhile, Duel was training Nor and Barreto in a 2-versus-1 match. He easily blocked Barreto's attack, then disarmed Nor with a quick move while still fending off Barreto. Grabbing Barreto by the collar, he threw him into Nor, knocking them both down. When Barreto got back up, his mohawk stood out like a target, so Duel smacked it, splitting it perfectly in 2. Barreto, still on the ground, burst out laughing, grinding his teeth. He charged again, this time filled with rage. Duel met him with the back of his fist, sending Barreto spinning like a windmill before crashing to the ground. The entire squad broke into laughter at the sight. A few days later, Walm managed to gain partial control over Ignis Fatuus, but a new problem appeared. He could only sustain it for 30 seconds. If he went beyond 40, his mana would run dry. When that happened, he couldn't use his skills or even basic fireballs, and his physical abilities would plummet. If he pushed too far, it could kill him. As the fire died down, Jose entered the tunnel to check on Walm's condition. Walm, crawling on the ground, handed him a cooked chicken and joked that he was just worried about the food. He had apparently become the squad's portable stove, using his fire to cook meals. He didn't mind, though. The food was good. When Walm and Jose brought the food outside, the aroma drifted through the air, making everyone hungry. Jose claimed it was part of their plan. The smell would crush enemy morale. Walm doubted that, saying everyone just wanted to eat their fill. Jose grinned and handed him a piece of chicken, saying bland food had no place on the battlefield. Walm took a bite, immediately changing his mind, but still tried to deny it, claiming Ignis Fatuus had drained his mana and he only needed the calories. Deep down, though, he enjoyed it. As they ate, Jose said this peaceful routine wouldn't last much longer. He glanced around before explaining that more enemy soldiers had been fleeing recently. They couldn't bear confinement any longer, so many were surrendering. Walm joked that their daily choir must have done the trick, but Jose argued the cooking smells probably played a part too. Walm found that hard to believe, but Jose just left. He told Walm to imagine being a furious soldier trapped inside the walls, surrounded day and night by the enemy, rationing the last of your food while hearing the higher troops outside feasting on fresh meals. The sound alone would drive anyone mad. Hearing that made Walm uneasy. Jose smiled faintly and told him to enjoy what little peace they had left. Walm couldn't help but look up to him, realizing he still had much to learn. 3 days later, blue flames engulfed the fortress. The various soldiers panicked, thinking the higher troops had infiltrated. As they rushed to extinguish the fire, Walm stood atop the walls, wearing his Oni mask, watching the scene unfold below. Inside the tent before the attack, the tactician explained that the mine's geographical location was difficult. Aside from that, it was also fortified, and because the terrain was narrow, deploying soldiers would be tough. That meant they couldn't overwhelm the enemy with numbers. That's where Walm would come into play. He was tasked with leading a night raid with a small unit using Ignis Fatuus to cause total chaos within the castle walls. Walm would be accompanied by a wind element magic user, and together they'd create enough disturbance for the 2nd Battalion to take the fort in one go. After the briefing, the tactician asked if anyone had questions. Walm was devastated that he had suddenly become so important for this mission, and even thought they saw him as some kind of pyromaniac, but he couldn't refuse orders. Later that night, Walm and the others wore black cloaks to blend with the shadows as they crawled toward one of the fort's walls. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the area and create an opening so their allies could storm the place. Walm steeled himself and put on his Oni mask. As they rushed toward the wall, he remembered his training with Willat. Since Walm had a high affinity with both fire and wind elements, Willat had taught him how to use wind magic to jump higher. Walm and his group used that technique, catching a night patrol off guard. One of the soldiers screamed, but Walm immediately cut his head off. 2 more soldiers saw what happened, but his teammates quickly took them down. They rushed toward the defensive tower. Inside, Walm found a group of soldiers resting at a table. Walm was terrible at stealth missions, so he had no choice but to brute force his way through. He unleashed Ignis Fatuus toward the soldiers, engulfing them in blue flames. Their screams echoed as they burned, not just from the outside, but from the inside as well. Witnessing the horror, Walm averted his gaze. The noise drew the attention of the guards above, who rushed to investigate, only for the platform they stood on to explode. They caught fire and fell 30 feet to the ground. Fious finally sounded the alarm as their men scrambled to their positions. What they saw next shocked them. The stone defensive tower was burning, and stones weren't supposed to burn. Arrows then rained down from above. They came from the Highserk soldiers who had entered with Walm and taken a higher position. Walm was catching his breath when one of his teammates ran up, telling him they had the area covered. The enemies were approaching from below, so they had to hurry before reinforcements arrived from the other tower. Seizing this tower had been the hard part. Now they just had to hold out until the main force arrived. Walm was ordered to set ablaze the passage leading there so no one could cross. As he went back to the burned area, he saw the soldiers he'd incinerated. The memory of their screams came rushing back. Walm grabbed at himself, racked with guilt. The morals and conscience he carried from his previous life had been shattered. He realized, just like in Edinburgh, how much suffering his Ignis Fatuus had caused before death even came. If this wasn't his second life, if he had been born in this world originally, maybe he wouldn't be suffering right now. But he forced himself to stop thinking about it and carried out his orders. Walm burned down the passage. The blue flames spread quickly, forcing the enemy soldiers to retreat. It was hell. They couldn't extinguish the fire without risking being caught in it themselves. They were forced to watch their comrades burn alive. As Walm walked through the tower, he counted the soldiers he'd killed. His count reached 31 before he collapsed to his knees, nearly out of magic. At least no one else was coming. He closed his eyes as the blue flames consumed the tower. Then he heard a loud thud. 3 soldiers had forced their way through the heat and stood before him. They demanded to know if he was the one who caused the fire. Drawing their swords, they sarcastically thanked Walm for their daily chanting day and night, and for letting them smell their dog food. Walm only laughed and apologized to them, saying that today would be the day their service ended. The three soldiers scattered in case Walm used his Ignis Fatuus, but they didn't know that Walm was at his limit. He hardly had any magic left. The three of them rushed at Walm. So Walm used his skill to attack the soldier with a nose scar, but the soldier blocked it easily and began to counter. Walm dodged and stepped back, but the soldier with the receding hairline and the magic user weren't letting him rest. The one with the hairline lunged at him while the other at the back cast water magic. Walm knew he would die there, so he mustered all his strength to use Ignis Fatuus to burn the soldiers. But the one with the shield pushed through the flames and attacked. Walm barely dodged, but water bullets came flying from the mage, so he fired a fireball to intercept them, filling the room with thick mist. While hiding in the mist, Walm analyzed his enemies. The one with the nose scar was skilled at strengthening his body with magic. The one with the receding hairline was a fire element user who specialized in fire resistance, and the mage was a water element user who protected the others from flames. Realizing this, Walm burst out of the mist and lunged at the one with the receding hairline using his halberd. The nose-scarred soldier protected him by attacking Walm. Walm dodged and countered, but the strike was blocked. The mage fired more water bullets, carefully avoiding the nose-scarred soldier who followed close behind them. Walm was shocked. Their coordination was that good. He couldn't make a single move. It was as if he was dancing on a minefield. The nose-scarred soldier attacked again, but Walm met the blow with his halberd, pinning the enemy's sword to the floor, then kicked him away. The one with the receding hairline attacked from behind, but Walm dodged and pushed him back with fire, which had little effect. Walm cursed under his breath. If he kept fighting like this, his mana would run out and he'd be tortured to death. He had no choice but to increase the output of Ignis Fatuus until even the enemy's fire resistance failed. It worked. The soldier with the receding hairline was burned alive. The nose-scarred soldier roared in anger at the death of his comrade. He rushed forward and the mage fired more water bullets. They came all at once, and instead of hitting Walm, the water struck the burning soldier instead. The mage had prioritized saving his comrade. Walm felt a pang of sadness. They cared about each other, but that's what made them bad soldiers. The nose-scarred soldier lunged again with all his strength, but Walm raised a small flame in front of him. Even so, his opponent pressed on and tried to decapitate him. But his sword flew from his hands, saving Walm from death. The man looked down and realized too late that his hands were burned, and he could no longer grip his weapon properly. The nose-scarred soldier dove to grab his sword, but Walm took advantage of the moment and stabbed him in the neck. The only one left was the mage. He looked terrified at first, but after seeing his comrades' bodies, he braced himself and took his stance. Walm glared at him, but then saw the mage's face twist in shock. When he looked down, he saw the nose-scarred soldier he'd stabbed was still alive, gripping Walm's halberd and holding onto his lower body. Walm tried to pull the weapon free, but it wouldn't budge. The soldier coughed blood, but still refused to let go. Walm punched him, but he still wouldn't release it. The mage screamed and charged, swinging his sword. Walm was defenseless. He used his arm guard to block, but it didn't stop the swing completely. The blade missed his neck, but cut deep into his shoulder. Walm screamed in pain, which finally made the dying soldier release his grip with a faint smile before collapsing. The enraged mage ground the stuck sword deeper into Walm's shoulder. Walm rushed forward and tackled him to the ground. The mage's sword flew away, forcing them into a fist fight. The mage punched Walm in the stomach, but Walm used the chance to grab his neck. The mage lifted Walm and slammed him into the floor, but Walm repositioned himself and locked the mage into a chokehold. He tightened his grip as the mage struggled, kicking and clawing until he finally lost consciousness. Walm let go and stood up, but to be sure, he stabbed the mage through the chest. He sat down and removed his mask, catching his breath. They were all dead. Walm didn't notice that the one with the burned body, the man with the receding hairline, had stood back up, clutching his sword. He was about to swing when the arrow pierced the back of his head, dropping him instantly. One of the soldiers who had come with Walm stood there. Walm thanked him, but told him he should have come earlier since he was almost turned into mincemeat. The soldier replied that he wasn't brave enough to throw himself into a raging fire. Seeing Walm's shoulder gushing blood, he carried him outside and leaned him against a wall. As the soldier was about to leave to get bandages, Walm noticed something beside him and pointed at it. The soldier only replied, telling him to wait patiently with his roommate. Leaning against the wall beside a charred corpse, Walm felt uncomfortable until he realized he was the one who had done it. The guilt grew heavier. Below, the main army finally broke through the castle gate, cheering loudly. The mask beside Walm began to vibrate, and he could only wonder how these people could enjoy this so much. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Christ, leaders from Barristan, Liberatoa, and Fious gathered to discuss countermeasures against Highserk's rapid rise. An old man entered the room, his face marked with deep scars. He was Hugo Evans, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Liberatoa. Taking his seat, he casually summoned a small flame with his magic, causing the guards to tense up, but he merely used it to light his cigar. Hugo smirked at their overreaction, teasing one of the guards just enough to irritate him. The guard clenched his jaw, but held back his anger. Leaning back, Hugo began to observe the other representatives present. At the head of the table sat King Chester Christ of the Kingdom of Christ, the host of the meeting. Beside him was King Barristan Fious, ruler of the Fious Kingdom, currently under invasion by the Highserk army. The Fious king's eyes still carried the fire of a man unwilling to surrender. Perhaps that resolve came from vengeance. After all, Walm had killed his brother. When Hugo turned to his left, his gaze landed on a young woman of striking beauty. Curious, he asked who she was. She introduced herself as Rita Mjard, the same girl Walm had spared not long ago. 3 weeks had passed since the fall of the fort at Refn Mine. Walm sat inside the base as a healing mage finished checking him over, declaring that he was fully recovered and no longer needed to stay put. While the various strongholds were being taken one after another, their remaining soldiers had holed up deep in the mines, slowly destroying themselves from within. On paper, they had enough supplies and manpower to endure. But after endless sieges and constant psychological warfare, their will to fight had crumbled. From the Refn mine to every nearby castle and fort, the story was the same. What finally broke them was a single chilling warning from the Highserk army. Surrender immediately or we'll kill you all, soldiers and civilians alike. Walm rose from his cot and went to rejoin his squad. As he walked, he passed rows of captured soldiers. Their faces were hollow, their eyes empty, men broken by exhaustion and fear. For a brief moment, Walm felt a twinge of pity, but he quickly pushed it aside and kept moving. He soon ran into Jose, who greeted him with a grin and commented on how healthy he looked. Testing his shoulder, Walm replied that healing magic really was incredible. Wounds that should have taken months to heal were gone in just 2 weeks. Then Nor came over to greet him. Walm smirked, teasing her about how rugged she looked. She slumped dramatically and complained that after he was injured, their squad was sent to capture the castle and something had happened to Barrido. A sluggish figure approached them, Barrido himself. Walm's concern faded the moment he saw his friend's face. Barrido's trademark mohawk was gone. Walm burst out laughing. Barrido groaned in tears, explaining that it was the work of an enemy mage. Jose tried to hold back his laughter, joking that Barrido should be glad the rest of him was still intact, while Nor clapped like the end scene of Evangelion. Off to the side, Walm spotted Willett sitting quietly in the corner. The two exchanged nods of acknowledgement. Everyone seemed fine, so Walm asked about their squad leader, Dewey. Jose told him that Dewey had been called over by the platoon commander. Apparently, the mines still weren't completely secured. Judging by the movement of the leading troops, it seemed Highserk was preparing to advance deeper into Fious territory. Back in the Kingdom of Christ, the meeting of representatives continued. Among the gathered figures stood Rita, daughter of the former king of Mjard. She introduced herself as the representative of the Mjard Duke, a claim that drew immediate skepticism from Hugo Evans. To him, Mjard was already a fallen land, its cities taken, its people scattered. The very idea of a representative seemed almost laughable, yet Rita's composure did not falter. She admitted that most of Mjard's territories had been lost, but one still remained, the land of Serta. Serta was surrounded by a vast lake, abundant in fish and crisscrossed with trade waterways. Once a thriving economic hub, it had long since become a forbidden zone. A lake dragon had made its home there, a creature ranked among the highest-class monsters. Though it was a subspecies of dragon, its power was such that even the Highserk Empire had avoided provoking it. But now that dragon was gone, subjugated. The announcement silenced the hall. Even Hugo, always sharp-tongued, was left in disbelief. 6 months earlier, such a feat would have been unthinkable until a man appeared, a fire element user capable of scorching even a dragon. With a single holy strike, the creature had been slain. His name was Akima Yuyudo, one of the 3 heroes of Christ and one of the visitors from another world. Somewhere in a small village within Fious, Hisk soldiers were laughing among themselves. They boasted about how lucky they were to have joined the Highserk army, how the invasion had brought them freedom to loot, pillage, and do as they pleased. With the skilled, various soldiers wiped out in Mjard, only weak resistance remained in the area. One soldier crouched near a corpse, grinning as he began to unzip his pants. Another stopped him, reminding him that they were ordered to move to the next village. The man only laughed, saying that various women were too good to resist. The others joined in his laughter until a shadow loomed over them. A crumbling tower collapsed, crushing several soldiers beneath the debris. Dust and screams filled the air. Before anyone could make sense of what happened, one soldier shouted that they were under attack. But before he could say more, his body was split open. Panic spread instantly. The survivors tried to retreat, only to realize they were surrounded. As the dust cleared, their attackers came into view. Not various soldiers, but troops of the Kingdom of Christ. One terrified soldier tried to flee, but was cut cleanly in half. Outnumbered and outmatched, the rest dropped their loot and ran, abandoning everything as they fled the burning village. At the edge of the road, a lone man stood in their path. His voice was calm when he told them to surrender. The Highserk soldiers drew their weapons instead, unaware of the power radiating from him, a blazing magical aura that flared brighter than fire itself. That night, 3 Saria battalions of the Highserk army were annihilated. Over 700 soldiers never returned. Far from the battlefield, Jose was stunned by the sudden order to retreat. It made no sense. They were supposed to be advancing deeper into fious territory. Even Duel, their squad leader, admitted that he couldn't believe it himself. When he questioned the war council, the answer he received left him speechless. The kingdoms of Fious and Christ, the nation of Liberatoa, and the remnants of Mjard had joined forces. The squad fell silent. The meaning was clear. Every nation in the northern archipelago had now become their enemy. Burrito, pale and uneasy, asked the question that hung over everyone's mind. The enemy's numbers. The Highserk army deployed in Fious numbered 16,000. Even counting the 2 battalions stationed at Edinburgh, they would have around 24,000 troops in total. Duel, sweating, gave the final piece of information in a strained voice. The enemy's total force exceeds 60,000. During the royal meeting, King Barristan proposed the formation of a 4-nation alliance, a pact that emphasized both the military and economic strength of the 4 nations, with the Lake of Serta designated as the central economic zone. The idea stirred mixed reactions. Hugo couldn't help but laugh, finding amusement in the political play, though his laughter unsettled Rita. He continued for a moment, entertained by the potential chaos such an alliance could bring before stopping abruptly under the sharp stares of those around him. By the end of the meeting, all representatives had agreed. The 4-nation alliance was officially formed. Meanwhile, back at the Rafen mines, Duel's squad held their position at the fort. Until recently, the Highserk army had been on the offensive, but the situation had changed. Orders for withdrawal had arrived. The retreat would lead them to the Sarajevo fortress, where a decisive battle was expected to take place. With the men and supplies they had looted, victory was uncertain, but defeat was not yet guaranteed. Their task was to hold the mines long enough for Allied forces to retreat from the interior of Fious. Reluctantly, the squad prepared to abandon the mine. Facing an army of 60,000 was beyond their capability. Even Walm, who had narrowly escaped death in recent battles, understood there was no other option. Duel declared that they wouldn't leave the mine for free, and moments later, explosions echoed through the tunnels. The Highserk forces had begun collapsing the mines, ensuring the enemy couldn't exploit their resources. Duel informed everyone that the higher-ups had ordered all prisoners of war to be executed, which made Walm's expression darken. Duel himself was against the decision, believing it would be wiser to turn the captives into laborers to carry supplies rather than waste their lives. Walm could only sigh, understanding how little choice any of them had in the matter. For the time being, their mission was to defend the mine and support the retreating forces. Duel reminded everyone to stay alert despite the defensive advantage. Soon, the battle began. The forces of Liberatoa launched an assault, scaling the walls with ladders. Walm shouted for the men to keep them off. Jose rushed to push a ladder away while Walm hurled a rock that shattered another, sending the attackers falling to their deaths. The enemy's advance grew fiercer. Duel grabbed a large stone and threw it with such force that it crushed the helmet and skull of an armored soldier. Their platoon commander called out that the left flank was faltering and ordered Walm to reinforce it. Walm dashed to the left wing, but defenders struggled against enemy mages. Position, he warned the nearby soldiers of what he was about to unleash. Recognizing the danger, they scattered for cover. Sitting on the ledge, Walm gathered his mana. The enemy noticed him, but too late. With a surge of power, he released Ignis Fatuus. Pale flames erupted across the battlefield, engulfing everything in their path. The soldiers of Liberatoa screamed as the fire clung to their bodies, burning through armor and shields alike. Walm watched from above, unmoved. The smell of burning flesh no longer disturbed him. He had grown used to it. When the flames died down, he descended to the ledge. The soldiers nearby whispered about the horror of the scene, yet none condemned him. Instead, they approached to thank him for saving their position, relieved that he fought on their side. Walm could hardly believe it, but the sincerity in their words was clear before they turned away to tend the wounded and restock ammunition. Soon after, Jose called out to him. Duel's squad was gathering for the next operation. Jose warned that Ignis Fatuus would be used again. Walm simply nodded, saying nothing more. He had already grown accustomed to it. Still, the current commander steeled himself and ordered his men to prepare. His subordinates confirmed that the company stood ready, awaiting only his command. Back at the fort, Walm and Jose noticed the movement from afar and prepared to execute their defensive plan. As the Liberatoa soldiers advanced into range, they drenched themselves in water and smeared their bodies with mud, desperate to shield against the fire they feared most. Despite their precautions, unease clung to them. Even their commander felt it. His instincts screamed for survival. But the memory of the last defeat pushed him forward. Forcing down his fear, he gave the signal to attack. The Liberatoa forces charged toward the fort, only to be met with a sudden storm of arrows. The commander shouted for his men to take cover beneath the walls as volleys rained down from above. When the barrage finally ended, it was followed by a wave of destructive magic. Even so, the soldiers pressed on, reaching the base of the walls and quickly setting up their ladders. Surveying the battlefield, the commander noted with some relief that their casualties were not as severe as expected. His men were already climbing, and for the first time it seemed victory might actually be within reach. But as the first soldiers neared the top, the world erupted into blue fire. Ignis Fatuus, the ethereal flames spread with terrifying speed, devouring the upper walls and the soldiers upon them. The commander immediately ordered a retreat to the trenches as the fire intensified. Those caught in the blaze frantically rolled in the dirt to smother the flames. Their screams were drowned by the roar of burning stone and wood. The commander stared in disbelief. Air had set fire to its own corridors, sacrificing the fort's defenses without hesitation. Then realization struck him. He cursed under his breath and shouted new orders. The men, confused but obedient, once again raised their ladders and climbed. When they reached the top, they found the corridor empty. The commander clenched his fist and kicked aside a fallen helmet. The truth was bitterly clear. The Highserk forces had been retreating all along. While the Liberatoa army fought desperately to seize the fort, the enemy had used the chaos to withdraw, burning everything behind them to cover their escape. He shut his eyes for a moment, humiliated at having been outplayed. Regaining his composure, he ordered the first platoon to extinguish the remaining fires and the second and third to stand guard. Moments later, the scouts he had sent ahead returned with grim news. Highserk had destroyed the entire military road leading deeper into Fious. They had used every resource, every life to capture this fort, only for the enemy to abandon it at their own convenience. The commander stood in silence, staring at the smoldering ruins, and wondered whether this war against Highserk was worth anything at all. Meanwhile, in a small village, Walm's battalion continued its retreat. The Highserk soldiers were tearing down houses, filling the roads with rubble to slow the enemy's pursuit. Walm heaved boulders onto the main path while others broke wooden pillars and buried them halfway into the ground, creating crude barricades to buy even a little more time. Exhaustion weighed on him. His legs trembled, his vision blurred, and he nearly collapsed from fatigue. Then the platoon commander arrived with urgent orders. The Liberatoa forces were approaching. It was time to withdraw. The soldiers gathered their weapons and supplies in haste. Jose shouted for Walm to keep moving while Willett tossed him a water pouch. Walm caught it, muttered a quick thanks, and pushed forward. At the rear, Duel scanned the group, making sure no one had been left behind. Once certain his men were all accounted for, he gave the final order to move out. As the battalion marched away, he cast one last look at the smoke-filled horizon and quietly marked the end of their time at the mines. The next battle would be fought at Sarajevo Fortress. Despite the four-nation alliance making steady advances since the start of the campaign, the Highserk army continued to fight with calculated precision. Jeff's cavalry battalion struck the Christ soldiers with relentless raids while other units used magic to collapse mountains, destroy bridges, and tear apart military roads. These delaying tactics, brutal and methodical, paid off. The alliance's advance ground to a halt at Refn Mine, buying Highserk the precious time it needed to regroup and prepare for the decisive stand at Sarajevo Fortress. At the Fious military camp, chaos filled the tents. A soldier knelt beside his friend, desperately trying to stop the bleeding and pleading for any mage to heal him. But all the mages had already exhausted their magic for the day. The soldier's hope dwindled as he watched his friend's life hang by a thread until a Christ soldier appeared, gesturing for him to follow. They carried the wounded man to a tent guarded by several sentries, leaving their weapons outside before entering. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, the patients resting peacefully with no life-threatening injuries visible. As they laid the injured soldier down, a young woman knelt beside him. Her hands hovered over his arm, which was nearly severed. In an instant, bones, joints, veins, and tissue regenerated flawlessly. The soldier could only stare, stunned by what he had witnessed. This girl was no ordinary helper. Every soldier brought here had survived under her care. Tears filled the soldier's eyes as he thanked her for saving his friend. She was Sugimoto Yan, one of Christ's 3 legendary heroes. With the wound fully healed, the arm appeared untouched by injury as though nothing had happened. Yan's assistant, Maya, entered to inform her it was break time. Yan thanked her, acknowledging that Maya's support allowed even an inexperienced girl to assist with treatments. Maya teased Yan for her lack of confidence, urging her to recognize her own abilities. She also mentioned that Yan's friends were nearby. Yan learned that her companions had fended off the notorious Jeff's cavalry battalion, leaving their allied knights and soldiers swarming around them in celebration. A small smile crossed her face at the news. After finishing her duties in the tent, Yan stepped outside and met Makoto and Yuyuto, who had just left the war council. Makoto grumbled about the difficulty of the day's engagement against Jeff's cavalry, whose speed and agility had challenged even the most skilled soldiers. Maya inquired if they had eaten, and upon learning they had not, told them that a noble they had saved had donated a generous amount of food: soft white bread, cheese, sausages, and more. The 3 heroes' faces brightened and they rushed to hug Maya in gratitude. Christ's 3 heroes were visitors from another world hailing from Japan. Just like Walm, Yuyuto, the dragon slayer, wielded holy and light-based attacks. Makoto, a prodigious mage, commanded all 4 elemental magics. Yan the healer could mend any wound instantly without chant or ritual. Though they were still children, their power surpassed any ordinary soldier. Meanwhile, in the Lega battalion, Duwei squad marched steadily towards Sarajevo fortress. Walm, eating his provisions, remained unaware that the battle approaching the fortress would soon bring him into the path of these heroes from another world. The Ligurian battalion pressed onward, passing through the remains of once lively villages. Collapsed bridges and burned-out homes lined their path. As they drew closer to their destination, Walm couldn't help but stare in awe at the massive structure before them, the Sarajevo fortress. Once a proud stronghold of the Mjard army, it now stood under Highserk control. The fortress was surrounded by steep mountains, its position bordering the demon territory, making it impossible to bypass. It was a natural fortress, a place built to hold its ground against any assault. Yet despite its advantages, it had fallen to Highserk within just 2 days during the invasion of Fious. The reason was simple. After the Battle of Edinburgh, Mjard no longer had enough soldiers to defend it properly. As the battalion entered the fortress, the sheer number of soldiers inside was overwhelming. It felt as if the entire army had gathered there. Duwei took a small measure of comfort from the sight, knowing his men weren't the only ones starving. The squad joined in, each eating what they had. Grumbling spread among them about the cramped space and the miserable rations. Still, most agreed that a crowded fort was better than standing alone on the battlefield. Burrito voiced his distaste for the food, and Nor reminded him that hunger left little room for preference. Warm, quiet, and withdrawn, sat apart from the noise. While the others nodded on their potatoes, he focused his attention on the one in his hand. He murmured under his breath, channeling a faint spark of magic into his palm. A dim, flickering heat spread through the potato's surface until its skin began to crisp. He worked discreetly, shielding the glow with his body. The smell of baked potato drifted through the air. He hesitated before taking a bite. The flavor was simple but rich, a brief luxury amid exhaustion. His relief was short-lived. A voice called his name from behind. His heart skipped as he froze silently, cursing himself. When he turned, he found Willett standing there holding a cup of water and inside it a potato. The look on Willett's face said everything. His mana was spent and he wanted Walm to handle it. Without a word, Walm understood the message perfectly. His secret was safe as long as Willett's potato received the same treatment. Walm accepted Willett's offer on one condition. Willett would handle his water duty for the day. Willett clicked his tongue in annoyance but agreed. With that settled, Walm conjured a faint glow of Ignis Fatuus, using its heat to boil the potato before handing it back. Willett bit into it with satisfaction, the rich aroma of the cooked potato drifting through the air. It didn't take long for Duwei to notice. Catching the scent, he asked Willett what he was eating. Willett tried to act casual while Walm's heart began to pound. Jose snitched on them, pointed out that he'd seen Walm hand something to Willett. Walm tried to deflect and deny, but Duwei only gave him a look and asked if he could really cook while walking. Jose patted Walm on the shoulder, appealing to his conscience. He reminded him that everyone had been marching for days without a single hot meal. Burrito and Nor joined in, saying that even a boiled potato would be enough to lift their spirits. Reluctantly, Walm gave in. He sighed and told them to hold his things while he worked. As they walked, Walm held a pot over a steady flame, boiling salted water with potatoes inside. The warm scent spread through the fort, drawing curious looks from passing soldiers. Before long, 3 soldiers known among the squad as the 3 idiots approached, teasing Walm by calling him a walking casserole. They pleaded to have their potatoes cooked too, promising to introduce him to a good woman in exchange. The teasing only grew as more soldiers lined up, each clutching their share of potatoes. Jose, ever the opportunist, took charge of the growing crowd and announced that it would cost 1 copper coin per boiled potato. The soldiers were just happy to taste something warm again. As Walm glanced at Burrito and Nor enjoying their food with genuine smiles, he couldn't help but feel a faint warmth himself, something close to peace. That peace didn't last. Jose turned to Nor and asked if she was any good at hunting. She mentioned her grandfather used to hunt in the forest, and Jose's eyes immediately lit up with another ridiculous idea. He proposed it to Walm at once. A walking chicken soup pot business where they'd make a fortune cooking meals on the move. Walm's patience snapped. Without a word, he unleashed a burst of Ignis Fatuus beneath Jose's feet. Jose leapt back, shouting at him to retract it before it burned through the ground. Panic spread among the nearby soldiers, some laughing, others demanding refunds for their burned potatoes. Amid the commotion, Nor simply chuckled, amused by how lively the squad remained, even in the middle of a grim situation. Later that night, the squad gathered around the campfire, drinking and sharing what little comfort they could find before the storm ahead. Walm broke the silence, asking Jose if it was true that the enemy had already made contact with their advance party. He'd heard the real battle would begin in 3 or 4 days. Jose confirmed it, his tone grim. The enemy force exceeded 50,000. He stared into the fire, muttering that soon the fortress would be buried beneath piles of corpses. The thought weighed on Walm. His gaze dropped to the ground, the crackle of burning wood filling the silence. Quietly, he wished that neither he nor any of his squadmates would be among the dead. The somber mood didn't last. A soldier banged on a pot, calling everyone to dinner. Jose got up with a grin, saying their last supper came earlier than expected. Walm stood too, teasing him to wash his hands first before his mother got angry. Laughter broke the tension, and for a while they simply ate and drank, the 2 moons above watching over them. Later, as the camp quieted down, Walm sat apart by the rampart, a faint glow from his cigarette cutting through the dark. He exhaled a stream of smoke and stared into the night sky. Jose wandered over and asked why he looked so melancholic. Walm said he'd just been wondering how long the war would last. The question caught Jose off guard. He answered lightly, "Until we win." Highserk had done nothing but win. Each victory brought more land, more enemies, and another war. Domination by force. That was the way of talk. Conquered. And now that same path had led them to fight 4 nations at once. In a world where weakness meant death, Walm couldn't help but wonder. If the war never ended, no matter how many times he fought, what was he supposed to do then? Jose brushed it off, telling him not to lose his nerve now. The enemy might have numbers, but Highserk had the advantage of terrain and fortifications. They wouldn't lose easily. Walm simply nodded, letting it go. Jose lay down beside him, saying nothing more. They sat there together, drinking under the pale glow of the moons. Walm took a sip of his fruit wine and winced at the sourness which made Jose laugh. A small, fleeting moment of peace shared between 2 soldiers who had long forgotten what peace felt like. Days later, the Highserk Imperial Army's Lugarian battalion stood ready for battle. Across the field, the Christ Royal Army and the Knight Order began their advance. Then the Klashuk's barrage of magic rained down first, exploding among the Liberatoa and crystals. In response, the Knights' chanting reached its peak and massive earth golems rose from the ground, stomping forward on living fortresses. Jose, watching the growing piles of bodies, muttered under his breath, wondering if this was what a soldier's graveyard looked like. The enemy soldiers charged relentlessly, climbing over fallen comrades to reach the high ground. Nor hurled a stone, striking one in the face and sending him stumbling back. Before the man could recover, a heavy log came crashing down, thrown by Duel himself. Walm's attention shifted to the adjacent bastion. The defenders there were faltering, struggling to hold their line while his own section managed to keep the enemy from breaching. Duel quickly ordered him to cast Fireball. As flames began to gather in Walm's palm, a voice called out his name. A messenger was looking for him. A bad feeling crept over him. Jose cracked a joke about some surprise gift waiting for him, but Walm wasn't amused. He met the messenger halfway, who breathlessly reported that the enemy was close to breaking through the rear's right flank. The commander had ordered Walm to stop their advance with Ignis Fatuus. Walm muttered about yet another fire-extinguishing job, and Jose couldn't resist adding that it sounded more like arson. Despite the levity, the situation was dire. Guided by the messenger, Walm sprinted toward the rear line. The scene that greeted him was worse than expected. The defenders were exhausted, their formation buckling under the relentless enemy push. The slope below teemed with enemy troops, all concentrating their assault on a single breach point. If they succeeded, the bastion would fall and momentum would swing to the enemy. There was no time to hesitate. Walm demanded 2 shields and prepared to unleash his magic. Close combat dominated this world, and dense formations usually meant survival, but against Ignis Fatuus, dense formations became death traps. Sliding his deep mask into his face, Walm released the blue flame. The fire burst outward like a living thing, rolling down the slope. The enemy's screams filled the air as panic spread through their ranks. Some tried to run, but the flames caught them. The blue fire clung to armor and flesh alike, burning through both. It consumed them inside and out, leaving nothing but collapsing silhouettes and the stench of charred metal and flesh. From the top of the wall, Walm watched what his magic had done. When he wore the demon mask, he didn't feel fear or guilt. As long as his face was hidden, he didn't feel human. He just felt like a soldier doing his job. When he climbed down, his commander praised him. Walm only nodded, said thanks, and walked away without a word. The Ignis Fatuus had done terrible damage. The ones who suffered most were the Liberatoa and Christ soldiers. 100 dead in one blast and even more wounded. Because of that, the alliance of 4 nations had to pull back for now. In the trenches, the survivors were covered in burns. They were shaking, eyes empty from what they'd seen. At the Christ army's field tents, the air was filled with screams and the smell of charred flesh. Healing mages ran themselves ragged trying to treat the flood of burned soldiers. Yan, exhausted but focused, worked non-stop. She had seen arrow wounds, broken bones, even lost limbs before, but this was different. Everyone brought in now was burned. One man could barely breathe, his throat scorched from the inside. Yan slid her hand into his mouth, pouring healing magic against his windpipe. The man gasped for air again, alive but not well. She couldn't heal him fully. She needed to save mana for others. Moving on, she found another soldier with burns across his lower body. He cried and begged her to help. Yan squeezed his hand, whispering that it would be okay. She kept healing one after another until her vision blurred and her body swayed from mana exhaustion. The other healers had already collapsed. She was the only one still standing. This was the only battlefield she could fight on, so she forced herself to keep going. By sunset, the rush of wounded finally stopped. The tent was quiet except for tired breathing and the crackle of flames outside. Yan looked toward the piles of corpses being burned. Then one wounded man crawled toward her. His skin was blackened, but he still smiled weakly and thanked her for saving him. Between sobs, he told her what happened. A man wearing a mask had unleashed blue flames, and in a blink, everyone around him was dead. He was one of the few who survived. Yan held him gently, telling him to rest. Tears fell from her eyes as she thanked him for staying alive. She was terrified of war, of the man with the blue fire, of losing the people she cared about. All she could do was pray that her childhood friends wouldn't be caught in that same flame. Later in the command tent, the leaders gathered. Their decision was clear. They would send Yuyudo, the dragon slayer hero, to hunt down the man who wielded Ignis Fatuus. The meeting dragged on inside the command tent, the air heavy with tension. One of the commanders stood and reported grimly that Highserk's bastion was only a temporary line of defense. Even if it fell, the true stronghold, Sarajevo Fortress, was still untouched. Still, the Christ Empire had been the only one in the 4-nation alliance to achieve real progress, taking down 2 bastions. That pride, however, had vanished after yesterday. He continued saying that during their latest assault, 102 soldiers were killed and 117 were injured, all because of a single Highserk soldier. The tent went silent. Some commanders stared in disbelief while others trembled. No one wanted to believe that one man could cause that much destruction. The commander then ordered the surviving squad leader from the front to be brought in. The man was carried inside, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, his skin scorched and barely recognizable. His voice was weak but steady as he spoke. He explained that his unit had been ordered to launch a full assault. They charged up the embankment, shields raised, pushing forward. Then someone shouted, "The Ignis Fatuus is here." He didn't believe it. He thought it was just a battlefield myth. But the next moment, everything was over. The soldiers closest to the enemy within 5 meters were burned alive in an instant. Those 15 meters away, including him, were left writhing in agony with severe burns. Even those 20 meters out didn't escape unscathed. He said, The men were taught that when attacked by magic they should take cover behind shields or drop to the ground. But with Ignis Fatuus there was no defense. You couldn't hide, you couldn't block it, all you could do was run. And even then, death still caught you. When the survivor finished, the tent fell into uneasy silence. Fear spread among the officers, not of an army, but of one soldier. Johann, Knight of the Chris Royal Knights, clenched her fists, remembering the charred bodies she'd seen on the battlefield. They began discussing countermeasures. The only idea that made sense was to lure the Ignis Fatuus user out. No one wanted to volunteer until Johann stepped forward. She offered herself and her squad as bait. The commander stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Failure was not an option, he told her. The next morning, Walm was the first to wake. The camp was quiet, the air still thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. When he sat up, his hand brushed against something soft. It was Nor, asleep beside him. He grinned and decided to pull a prank, pinching her nose shut. She jerked in her sleep and swung a punch, hitting Burrito. Burrito jolted awake, half-conscious, muttering that they were under attack before curling back up. Walm tried not to laugh, but seeing Dewey asleep with his mouth wide open and snoring like a bear made it impossible. The three idiots were tangled together like a pile of laundry, while Jose slept peacefully, clutching his canteen like a pillow. For a rare moment, Walm forgot about the smell of death and the stench of mud and blood that clung to the wind. He smiled quietly, drank from his water flask, and lay back down beside his squad, letting himself drift off again just for a little longer before the next battle began. Later that morning, Dewey's squad gathered for their orders. They were to support Platoon Palma, a routine task, or so it seemed. The enemy was expected to push from the trenches, and their job was to drive them back. If it ever looked like the line would break, Walm would unleash his Ignis Fatuus to wipe them out in one go. Walm was told to conserve his mana. Jose would watch over the rookies. Willett would back Walm up with magic, and the three idiots were to look for any weak spots and crush them when the chance came. The squad shouted in excitement as they headed to their positions. The battle started in chaos. Wounded soldiers were thrown through rocks like fastballs, hitting an enemy square in the head and dropping him instantly. Nor's arrows whistled through the air, every shot precise. She wasn't the strongest in close combat, but when it came to archery, she was unmatched even among the veterans. When Walm complimented her, she blushed but didn't slow down. Burrito nearly got skewered by Ice Spike, but Jose leaped in, shattering them all with a single swing. Burrito looked at him in awe and muttered his thanks. The fight dragged on. Attack, defend, repeat. Walm noticed something different this time. The enemy felt off. They fought harder, almost desperate. Even their mages, who usually stayed behind, were charging into the fray. He brushed it aside at first until his old habit kicked in, thinking too much in the middle of battle. Burrito shouted a warning, but before Walm could react, a fireball slammed into them. He took the hit without flinching, the explosion washing over him. Jose, Nor, and Burrito ducked behind him, using him as a shield. Walm had learned something during the night raids. Those with an aptitude to an element also had resistance to it. Still, he couldn't believe they were treating him like a meat shield. Then in the distance, he saw Johann's squad charging. His gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Even the enemy cavalry was moving in. A Highserk mage tried to intercept, throwing a wind blade at Johann, but she batted it aside like nothing and hurled her spear back. The mage didn't even have time to react before it hit him dead on. Walm realized just how dangerous she was. As Johann's squad drew closer, the platoon commander shouted for Walm to use Ignis Fatuus. He climbed the ledge and pulled on his mask, but then he froze. Johann was staring straight at him. Before he could react, she began her chant. Water spheres shot toward him in rapid bursts and hit him squarely, knocking him off the ledge. He fell hard, the impact jarring his bones. For a moment, his thoughts scattered. Why had he been hit? Everything was the same as yesterday. Then it hit him. He wasn't just part of the fight. He was the target. He reached for his sword, but pain exploded through his foot. Johann's thrown blade had pinned him to the ground. Walm screamed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Nor's eyes filled with tears. Burrito clutched his head. Jose finally understood what was happening, but could do nothing except shout Walm's name. Dewey jumped from the wall, sprinting toward Walm. His body ached, but all he could think about was saving his comrade. The man who'd fought beside him laughed beside him. He was almost there when the rain of fireballs fell from above, burning into his armor. He stumbled but didn't stop. Jose, watching from afar, felt his stomach twist. Something terrible was about to happen. A blinding light filled the air. The hero's attack hit Walm before Dewey could reach him. The explosion swallowed everything. The ground beneath Walm gave way, and he plunged into the darkness as the world above vanished in blinding white. Walm dreamed of his childhood, a time when famine had hollowed out his village. He and his brother scavenged for food, their stomachs tight from hunger. Even their families' fields had dried up. At that rate, they would all starve. His brother called him over, saying he wanted to show him something. When Walm followed, he saw trees full of fruit. The two of them rushed down the hill, laughing, grabbing whatever they could reach, and eating greedily. His brother grinned and told him not to tell anyone. He said Walm needed the food more since he was still growing. Birds gathered around them, drawn by the fruit, and Walm joked that they could make a meal out of the birds, too. His brother laughed, calling him a cold bastard, then admitted he was worried about him, that even their parents were. Walm always acts like a grown-up and feels responsible for them. His brother reminded him that he was the youngest, that he should allow himself to be one. He pinched Walm's cheeks and tickled him until they both fell over laughing. Walm felt happy that his brother was worried about him and he apologizes. Then the dream shifted. He was walking home from work back when he was still Takakura in Japan. The city lights flickered in the distance. Something nagged at him, a feeling that he had forgotten something important. Then it came to him. Takakura is dead. A portal tore open beside him, dark shapes writhing within it. Voices whispered for him to jump. He did. Walm woke under a mound of rubble. His body screaming in pain, he forced himself up, checking his injuries, a mangled foot, several broken fingers, and blindness in one. The holy strike had burned through half his face, but the dirt that covered him must have shielded him just enough to survive. A cruel mercy. He looked around and found himself in a ditch filled with corpses. Highserk soldiers, his comrades, piled like discarded rags. The stench was unbearable. His heart sank when he saw familiar faces. The three idiots from his squad, lifeless, their eyes gouged out. Turning his head, he saw the rest. No burrito, everyone. Dewey's entire squad was gone. Walm fell to his knees and screamed, the sound raw and broken. He stayed like that for a long while until there were no more tears left. When he finally stood, something in his gaze had changed. He noticed the flag of the Four-Nation Alliance fluttering nearby. The fortress around him was ruined. The front line turned into a graveyard. What had been a battlefield just hours ago was now eerily silent. In the distance, faint lights glimmered along the walls, a black banner waving. Maybe their forces had retreated there, he thought. Maybe. His eyes drifted back to the corpses, their mutilated faces, their missing eyes. He remembered what his brother once told him, that those who lost their eyes before death would never reach the underworld, condemned to wander in darkness forever. It looked like every one of his comrades had been tortured before being killed. Walm wondered why anyone would do such cruel things, even to enemies. War was supposed to have rules, he thought. Then a laugh bubbled up from somewhere dark inside him. He remembered how easily he'd killed before, how little mercy he'd shown. Who was he to talk about reason? Death came in an instant, he told himself. It made no exceptions. One moment someone was alive, the next they were gone. This was the truth of war, kill or be killed. Two enemy soldiers appeared at the edge of the ditch, likely part of a patrol. They saw Walm moving and mistook him for an undead. They approached carelessly, weapons half lowered. Walm sat there whispering to himself, asking what he wanted. The question circled in his mind. What did he still live for? Duty, revenge, loyalty, hatred. By the time he found his answer, the soldiers were already standing over him. Without warning, he slashed low, cutting both the soldiers' feet clean off. The man collapsed, screaming, and Walm's mouth twisted into a smile before he swung again, taking the man's head. The second soldier charged with his spear, but Walm caught the shaft bare-handed, wrenched it free, and ripped him apart piece by piece. When it was over, silence returned. He looked up at the sky. Ignis Fatuus, the bonfire of the underworld. Maybe he thought if he lit one now, his fallen comrades wandering in darkness might see it. Maybe it could guide them home. Something on the ground began to tremble. The demon mask, the same one he had worn before, seemed to call to him. He picked it up. Then Walm raised his hand and summoned his flame. Ignis Fatuus roared to life, engulfing the mound of corpses. He stood there watching as the fire consumed the bodies. Walm knew what he had to do, burning every enemy camp that stood in his way. Tents collapsed into cinders, and the night sky glowed with orange and blue fire. The scent of ash clung to him as he walked, driven only by revenge, a burning me to make them suffer for what they had done to his comrades. At the sixth circle of the enemy camps, inside a tent, Yuyudo couldn't fall asleep. The screams of soldiers from earlier lingered in his mind. As he was trying to get a grip, his childhood friend, Makoto, ran inside his tent, notifying him that they were under attack. Yuyudo quickly got up and asked about the welfare of Johan and Yan. As he left his tent, he saw a large blue fire as massive as a mountain spreading through the different circles at a terrifying rate. This meant the Ignis Fatuus user was still alive. Yuyudo thought he had already killed him and assumed that Walm had become an undead. Yuyudo still felt guilt for the people he had killed, but he continued to run toward the fire out of worry for Yan and Johan. Meanwhile, in another circle inside a tent, different factions from every nation were fighting over who was going to launch an all-out attack tomorrow on higher. They were like a bunch of vultures fighting over a carcass. The Christ were not joining in since their contribution guaranteed future authority for each country. That's why everyone wanted to spearhead. But now that the three heroes had defeated the Lugarian battalion, the Empire of Christ had done enough. Johan, bored of it, suggested that they just draw lots, which pissed them off. Meanwhile, Rita Mjard just watched the situation unfold from a distance. Her knight offered her tea, which helped her stay calm in this tense situation. Johan and everyone then suddenly felt a tremor and heard noises. It sounded like fighting, and someone warned them that it might be spies, so it was better to stay put and wait for information on the attack since the place was well guarded. But Johan felt the air turn chill, carrying a magic power that felt familiar to her. Then guards went inside the tent, informing them that the attack was coming from the third circle. They thought it came from the undead. They asked how many undead there were, and the soldier replied that it was only one, the same Ignis Fatuus user they had been ordered to kill earlier. Panic erupted as they asked for his current location, only for the guard to be engulfed by blue flames. The fire exploded toward them. Johan quickly moved and kicked the table to cover herself in the blast. In an instant, the tent burned down, and as the fire died out, only 7 people survived inside the tent. Rita survived too because her knight Lutwidge covered her. As one soldier finally sighed in relief, something stabbed him from behind. Before he could look back, he was engulfed by blue flames. One commander lunged at Walm, but Walm moved so quickly that he immediately cut him in half. In an instant, only 5 people remained. As Johan drew her weapon, she couldn't believe that Walm could still fight in that state. His armor was tattered and his body was covered in wounds. They looked at each other, then both gathered their mana as they clashed. Walm was the first to attack, swinging his halberd with an enhanced strike. Johan barely managed to defend against it and couldn't believe Walm still had such strength despite his broken fingers. Walm unleashed his virtuous, but Johan reacted quickly, using earth magic to raise a wall of rock to shield herself. It wasn't enough. The blast pushed her back. As the dust settled, Johan looked directly into Walm's eye and realized he wasn't undead. He was still alive. That made him even more dangerous. Without allies around, Walm could use his full strength without restraint. Johan finally understood that Walm had come here to avenge his fallen comrades. Johan tried to talk to him, telling him that fighting was useless and that he was the last man standing from the Lugarian battalion. That only enraged Walm. He released another wave of Ignis Fatuus, but before it could reach it, Lutwidge stabbed Walm in the side, causing the flames to dissipate before they could incinerate Johan. Walm winced in pain as he glared at the old man. He swung his halberd at him, but Johan joined the fight, turning it into a 2-on-1 battle. In the distance, Rita sat frozen as the world around her burned. She couldn't stand up. Nothing made sense. There had been more than 20 people in the tent, and now only 5 remained. As she backed away, she noticed something about Walm. He looked familiar. Then Walm was pushed back, landing right in front of her. Their eyes met, and they recognized each other. Walm muttered only one thing, that he regrets not killing her that night. The words shattered Rita. She remembered the kind expression Walm once had, now twisted with pain and rage. Lutwidge swung his sword at Walm, but Walm blocked and countered. The 3 continued their deadly exchange. Rita sat on the ground, trembling. She had always believed she was doing what was best for her country. Yet now she couldn't even move. She wanted to help him somehow, but she couldn't because Walm was here as a result of what they had done. Moments later, the fight was over. Lutwidge returned to Rita's side and asked if she was okay. Rita replied that she was fine and asked about Walm. It seemed that Walm had used Ignis Fatuus again, creating a distraction to escape the tent. Lutwidge looked down and confirmed that Walm was the one who had spared their life that night. But for now, they had to put that aside and move on. Other important leaders left their hiding places, stunned to be the only survivors. Experiencing Ignis Fatuus firsthand made a huge difference. They had completely underestimated Walm and now agreed he was more dangerous than the 3 heroes. Their only option was to regroup with the rest of the troops and find the knight commander in charge. Rita followed them, hating herself for feeling powerless at such a critical moment. Meanwhile, at Sarajevo Fortress, Commander Gerard Berger of Highserk sat in his office, smoking a cigar and planning his next moves. The Christ heroes had been a constant thorn in his side, and he hadn't expected the defeat of the Lugarian battalion. He had survived many battles and seen almost everything, but he could not bring men back from the dead. He had to work with the resources he still had. Berger considered traps and assassination, sabotage, and suicide squads, but each option was either impractical or too small to matter. He settled on Plan B, hold the fortress as long as possible and use scorched earth delaying tactics on the Mjard front. Abandoning the territory now would get him stripped of command by the Imperial Council, sent to rot in the countryside, a fate he dreaded. Then the windows began to shake. He stepped out to the rampart himself and looked down. A huge blue blaze raged across the bastion. Walm was still alive. Berger ordered an all-out mobilization and to set a trap. Every available soldier would move. Tonight's battle had to be decisive. When one man questioned the order, Berger cut him off. Their only ally was speed. Time was everything. He barked orders until the camp sprang into life. Walm set ablaze a storeroom, causing panic throughout the camp as everyone focused on the fire instead of his whereabouts. They desperately tried to put it out before it reached the oil barrels stored nearby. But the flames grew stronger by the minute, and the wounded began to pile up. Meanwhile, Walm was dragging a dead fious soldier into a secluded spot. His side wound suddenly burst open, blood spilling out. The injury he received from the old man was worse than he thought. As he caught his breath, his mind drifted to thoughts of reason and morality. What was the point of revenge anymore? He couldn't find the three heroes or the main force of the Rodson cavalry. He couldn't kill Johan. He had even been beaten by an old man. Looking up at the sky, Walm muttered to his fallen comrades, asking if the fire he'd started was enough for them. If they wanted to laugh at him, now was the time. After a brief moment of silence, he decided it was time to find a way out. But first, he needed a change of clothes. When the search party finally arrived, they found a furious soldier lying on the ground, wincing in pain. One of them rushed over asking if he was all right, then lifted him up to help him walk. As they moved, the soldier told him to keep talking so he wouldn't lose consciousness. The wounded fious soldier was none other than Walm. As he glanced back at the burning storehouse, Walm silently thanked his old armor for saving him so many times and apologized to it in his mind. The soldier carrying him said he looked terrible, but reassured him that the sick bay was safe and well guarded. Walm considered killing the man at the first opportunity, but decided to play along for now. Once inside, he'd blend in with the other patients. Walm chuckled under his breath, and the soldier laughed as well, saying he should be glad to have survived. This night, he said, felt like something straight out of a nightmare, one he wished he could wake up from. When they arrived at the sick bay, the soldier called for the healing hero, laid Walm down and said goodbye, assuring him they'd take care of him now. A few moments later, the hero arrived. It was Yan. Walm immediately recognized her as one of the three heroes, confirming the rumors that all of them had been summoned to this world. Maya began to diagnose his condition. Bruises covered his body. A large laceration stretched across his left abdomen and ankle. All the fingers on his left hand were broken and 3 of his ribs had simple fractures. Yan placed her hands on him and began to heal. In an instant, his wounds closed. Walm was shocked by the speed and intensity of her magic. He had never seen regeneration like this before. No wonder their troops could fight recklessly with a healer like her around. It also meant she was a serious threat to both Highserk and the Empire. She had to be dealt with eventually. Walm reached for his sword, but hesitated. If he attacked now, they would kill him instantly. And besides, no one had ordered him to kill her yet. So he stayed still and let Yan finish healing him. After it was done, all of his wounds were healed except for his burned eye. He thanked Yan, and she replied that she was just glad she could help. Walm then proceeded to leave the room and move on to his next step, blending in with the other patients so he would be out of sight in no time. As he reached the hallway, he saw Johan and the other 2 heroes, so he decided to back away and hide. Walm calmed himself and tried to assess the situation. One enemy who could recognize him by face was now blocking his only exit. He had no choice but to act natural and blend in. He pulled his scarf up to cover half his face and tried to pass by. Walking toward them was nerve-wracking. The 3 were talking, saying they were glad Walm was nowhere near them. Johan blamed herself, saying that if she hadn't been careless, a lot of damage could have been prevented. The other 2 tried to cheer her up. Meanwhile, Walm kept moving, trying to slip past when Johan suddenly felt something. Walm was almost at the exit. Just when he thought he was safe, Johan called him out, asking if they knew each other. Johan didn't know any furious soldiers, but Walm looked familiar for some reason. Walm looked back and told her they had passed each other briefly during the attack in the inner circle. Johan accepted it. Various soldiers had been stationed there, and then asked what had happened to Walm's eye. He replied that it had been burned badly by an enemy's magic. Johan told him he was lucky and apologized for the interruption. Walm bowed and said something about it being an honor to speak with a knight. He rushed for the exit and made it through. Now he just needed to stay calm and blend in. Suddenly someone rushed in looking for the great heroes and Johan, which made Walm stop in his tracks. The messenger told the three they were to report immediately to Knight Commander Gran. Higher soldiers were attacking and had already broken into this circle. Everyone, including Walm, was in disbelief. Johan asked how they broke through so easily. The messenger explained they hadn't smashed the front. The front was still intact. Instead, soldiers had charged out from hidden tunnels covered by the fires. A plan by war god Gerard Berger. Everyone was shocked that there were underground tunnels. To make things worse, Commander Jeff's cavalry were attacking on horseback in their hundreds, and the numbers kept growing. Walm couldn't believe his allies had a counterattack like this. Johan told the messenger that she and the heroes would eradicate the problem at its root, the tunnels, which made Walm twitch. The messenger then guided Johan and the two heroes to their commander, and they ran toward the exit where Walm stood. Walm was conflicted. This was his single best chance to escape unnoticed, but if he let them pass, they would cost many lives. For a moment he thought of doing nothing. He told himself what he had done was enough and that he had fulfilled his duty. But remembering the corpses of his squad, a voice whispered at him, "You're going to let them die." Just like then, the low blow made him curse aloud. He decapitated the messenger instantly, shocking everyone. As Johan rushed forward, Walm shouted, "Nobody move an inch. If anyone tries to leave, I'll color this area bright blue." And he burned the messenger's body with his bright blue flame. They finally recognized who he truly was. Walm smirked and told them that both the healer and all the wounded would be taken as his hostages. Johan thought to herself that they were screwed. Walm was blocking their only way out. She had to end this quickly or else in a few minutes the Highserk army would retake the sixth circle. Walm knew time was on his side, so he tried to delay their moves. It became a race against time. Johan couldn't read Walm's empty eyes. Walm told them he didn't want to burn the wounded or the medics who had healed them, so they all better not move. Yudo called Walm a coward and accused him of bluffing, but Walm ignored him. Johan argued they could withstand his Ignis Fatuus, but Walm already knew the truth. A few of them could stand it, but most could not. The wounded touched their burns, traumatized by Walm's fire. Johan called Walm inhuman, and he answered that they were no different from him. Yudo, not grasping the full danger, decided to move and attack Walm. Johan also advanced, turning it into a 3-on-1 fight while Walm gathered mana to unleash Ignis Fatuus. Suddenly, Yan rushed out of the treatment room to see what the commotion was about. A blast enveloped the space. Blue fire filled the room and the wounded screamed in pain. But it was not enough. Johan and the others were still alive because Johan raised earth to shield the three heroes, but the blast was so powerful it still hit them. Yudo broke both arms and Makoto was impaled by debris from the shattered barrier. In an instant, 2 of the 3 heroes were down. Walm told Johan to surrender and promised he would kill her quickly, but she refused. Then a new hole opened in the sick bay. Commander Gran had arrived. Gran immediately struck at Walm. Walm blocked, but Gran's blow was so strong it battered Walm's side and sent him flying. Johan tried to apologize for her mistake, but Gran cut her off and ordered her to take the wounded heroes and retreat. The circle would soon be overrun and they had no time to waste. Johan protested, but Commander Gran insisted she go, and he stayed behind to hold off Walm. Walm finally stood up from the blow. The commander was impressed. He thought his attack would be enough to finish him, but Walm was different. He still had plenty of tricks left up his sleeve. Drawing his sword, Walm said he wouldn't let the knight and the 3 heroes escape. The commander replied that he had no intention of letting Walm chase after them either. Their swords clashed and Walm immediately felt the weight behind the commander's strikes. This man was no joke. His power was on par with Due. Both of them fought with brute strength, so Walm decided to switch up his style. But the commander suddenly grabbed Walm's arm and sword with one hand, locking him in place. He swung his great sword, but Walm barely dodged and backed away, only for Gran to follow up with a punch to the face that disoriented him. Gran pressed the attack again. He was a monster, strong, skilled, heavily armored, and still perfectly composed. Walm couldn't rely on his past experiences here. Gran read every move and didn't even show signs of exhaustion. Compared to him, fighting Johan almost felt easier. To make things worse, Gran didn't care about the wounded around them. The 2 were fighting in the sick bay, surrounded by injured soldiers who had survived Walm's earlier flames. Walm didn't want to burn them all, which kept him from using his magic freely. Gran swung again and Walm dodged midair before countering, but his strike was too shallow. Gran retaliated with a wide slash, forcing Walm to leap back. Then one of the patients screamed in agony. Gran's strike severed the man's hand. The sudden cry broke the rhythm of the battle, forcing both fighters to halt for a brief moment. Gran looked at the wounded man with detached calm, offering a half-hearted apology before coldly demanding silence. The words unsettled even Walm. Gran spoke as if the lives around them were nothing more than noise interrupting his task. He declared that from that moment onward, no one was to utter a single sound. The fight resumed. Though his victory was near earlier, Walm had the upper hand when he took hostages, but now his conscience was holding him back. That was Walm's biggest flaw, his unstable mind. Gran's strikes came heavy and relentless. Walm was on the defensive the whole time, each blow hitting not only him but the nearby patients too. Limbs were slashed off, but no one dared to scream. Then Gran landed a brutal slash from Walm's shoulder down to his side, sending him to his knees. Gran slowly approached, ready to crush Walm's skull with his bare hands, but something bothered him. Walm hadn't used Ignis Fatuus even once. He brushed off the thought and grabbed Walm's head. That's when Walm smirked and grabbed Gran's wrist. It was a trap. Gran tried to slash him, but Walm blocked the strike with the hilt of his sword and used the opening to slice off Gran's fingers. Gran screamed in pain and swung his greatsword down in anger, but Walm was already gone. Gran looked around frantically until he sensed movement behind him and stabbed, but it was only a patient. He couldn't believe it. Walm was just there a moment ago. Now he was gone, and Gran couldn't use his hand properly. At first, Gran thought Walm's earlier moves were all just traps, but they weren't. Walm had simply adapted, using the wounded as cover, fighting carefully, and learning how to move despite his restraints. In that short time, he had already adjusted to the situation. Using one of the patients as a decoy, Walm stabbed the commander in the side. For the first time, Gran felt a chill, a real sense of fear. The stab didn't pierce through completely because of his armor. Gran tried to swing again, but Walm ignited the tip of his sword with Ignis Fatuus, setting Gran's armor ablaze. That had been Walm's plan all along, to burn him alive. Gran fought back even while burning. He managed to cut Walm's sword in half, but Walm didn't stop. He used the same patient as a shield. The poor man just smiled faintly, accepting his fate. Moments later, the Highserk army finally arrived. Walm dropped the body while Gran tore off his burning armor. Accepting defeat, Gran said he'd take Walm's head next time. Walm just smirked and said, "Bark all you want, loser." Meanwhile, Yudo was screaming, begging Johan to return to the sick bay because Yan was still there, but she ignored him. Carrying the two injured heroes, she ran without looking back. Gran also left despite Walm's taunts about, "Are you forgetting something?" That something was Yan, who was left unconscious. When the Highserk soldiers entered the sick bay, they almost attacked Walm, mistaking him for an enemy because of the furious armor he wore. Walm quickly stopped them and explained that he was from the Lagoria battalion under Duway's command, and that the armor was just a disguise. He was barely standing, bleeding heavily. A captain recognized him by the red scarf and ordered his men to stand down. They were sent by Commander Berger to retake the lost circles and to assist the lone hero who gave them a chance to strike back. Thanks to Walm, the sixth circle had finally fallen. The captain walked away cheerfully, already thinking of the victory ahead. A healer came over and asked if Walm wanted water or a cigarette. Walm took the cigarette and tried to light it with his Ignis Fatuus, but he was completely out of mana. He chuckled at his own helplessness. Then the cigarette suddenly lit up. The healer smiled, saying he'd always wanted to see the Ignis Fatuus, but since Walm was out of energy, he'd use his own fire for now. He thanked the healer, promising that once his strength returned, he'd let him see the real thing as much as he wished. Meanwhile, in another circle, Hugo sat back and puffed on his cigar. His guard approached, informing him it was time to move. They couldn't stay there any longer. Hugo only smirked. In a single night, the four-nation alliance was already on the brink of collapse. Two of the three heroes had been defeated by Walm, and the last one, a healer, had been taken prisoner. Hugo laughed to himself. Things were finally getting interesting. Now it was his turn to move. Woke up in a bed, disoriented, until a higher soldier greeted him, assuring him he was safe and that they were now inside Sarajevo Fortress. Walm asked about the current state of the battle. The soldier explained that while Walm had slept for an entire day, the four-nation alliance suffered heavy losses and retreated to their previous positions. The Highserk army had reclaimed both Sarajevo Fortress and the outer rings. Both sides were back to where they started, but this time stood as the victor. The soldier added that the victory was thanks to Walm's efforts. Walm lowered his gaze as he took a sip of water. He didn't care if he had died in the process. Yet he couldn't bring himself to accept death either. No matter how much he wanted to let go, he was still clinging to life. They had won, but at a cost. He was the sole survivor. The soldier noticed the change in Walm's expression, his concern showing. He told Walm that once he finished his drink, he needed to report to Commander Berger and inform him that he'd regained consciousness. Walm joked that he wanted a few refills first. The soldier chuckled and told him he could have as much as he wanted. When Walm asked if he wasn't in a hurry, the soldier replied that even if Walm had woken up earlier, his report wouldn't be due until tomorrow anyway. Elsewhere in the fortress, Berger was in the middle of interrogating a prisoner. His tone was cold, detached as he cut into the man's fingers piece by piece. He told Yan that a prisoner of war was nothing more than a burden to both armies. Berger was trying to force her to heal soldiers, but Yan refused. He warned her that if she wanted to survive her stay, she needed to make herself useful. With so many wounded, they couldn't afford dead weight. He plunged his blade into the prisoner's side without hesitation. His was not out of danger yet, and Berger would do whatever it took to keep his forces alive. He told her she still had time to decide. There were plenty of prisoners left, but if she continued to resist, he would start with her assistant, Maya. Faced with the threat, Yan finally gave in and agreed to cooperate. As Berger turned to leave, Yan's voice trembled behind him. She asked how he could still call himself human after everything he'd done. Berger paused only for a moment before answering, "In war, nothing is human. I just do what needs to be done." Then he walked away, leaving her in silence. Later in Berger's office, Walm finally arrived. Berger greeted him with rare warmth, expressing his gratitude for his accomplishments. Walm's success was remarkable. His name had already spread across the entire Fella's army. Walm, however, humbly insisted that his actions were overestimated, claiming it was mere luck that he survived while his battalion was slaughtered. He admitted his regret, saying that if he had awakened earlier, things might have been different. Berger acknowledged the heavy loss of the Ligurian battalion, especially Dewey's squad, calling it a blow both professionally and personally. Yet he reminded Walm that he could have run and no one would have blamed him. But instead, he chose to fight, and for that, he deserved to be rewarded. Berger then announced Walm's promotion to knight status. The title caught Walm off guard, but Berger explained that it was an honorary distinction rather than an official rank. Still, it carried weight both on the field and at home. The rumor of Walm's feats had already reached their homeland, and the council needed a new national hero. Berger congratulated him, calling this the first step toward becoming a war god. He presented Walm with a new set of armor and a personal gift, a magic pouch. It was an old one, slightly limited in capacity, but it could carry far more than a normal bag and always felt as light as air. Walm thanked him sincerely, saying he would make good use of it. Berger wasn't finished, though, having heard that Walm's sword had snapped. He handed him a replacement, an imperial blade crafted for knights who had distinguished themselves in battle. Walm held the sword, admiring the craftsmanship and balance. Berger then informed him that from this point on, he would serve directly under his command. His first assignment had already been decided to keep watch over a very important individual. Walm's new duty was to act as the personal guard of one of Christ's 3 heroes, Yan Sujimoda. Walm met Yan and introduced himself, explaining that he was assigned to both protect and monitor her. Including him, there would be 4 guards stationed at all times to ensure her safety. He noticed how unusually calm Yan seemed about the arrangement, to the point that he began to suspect she didn't realize he was the same man responsible for killing countless soldiers and injuring her childhood friends. Maya, Yan's assistant, also introduced herself, reminding Walm that they had already met once before. It was clear they both knew who he truly was, so Walm simply thanked her for patching him up. He then explained that they wouldn't interfere with their work. But during emergencies, they would have to follow the guard's orders. Yan and Maya began treating the injured while Walm watched from the side. He couldn't help but be impressed. The 2 of them were saving soldiers who should have been dead within a day. Moritz, one of the guards, joked that Walm looked like he'd rather be out on the battlefield. Walm replied that Moritz should drop the formalities since he joined the army before him. Moritz laughed and said he didn't really have combat experience. He'd just been an errand boy for the chief of staff. Still, he mentioned proudly that he had a poison resistance skill, claiming that poisons actually tasted good to him now, which left Walm dumbfounded. Moments later, both of them were quietly amazed at Yan and Maya's work. They were saving one dying soldier after another. Walm thought it was more terrifying than any offensive spell he'd ever seen. That was the difference. Yan's power to heal was what made her a hero. Her lack of medical knowledge was perfectly balanced by Maya's expertise, and together they left no scar behind. They were without a doubt a perfect pair. A week passed, and Yan and Maya had become beloved figures among the higher soldiers. Every man they healed seemed to bring them gifts, flowers, trinkets, even food from their own rations. The sick bay, once filled with groans and the stench of blood, now carried the light chatter of men. Walm could feel it, too. The air was lighter. He watched Yan talking to the higher soldiers as if they hadn't been enemies only days ago. Her laughter blended with theirs, and for a brief moment, Walm found himself smiling. The mood shifted when Moritz brought in a new patient, a worker who had fallen from the ramparts. Walm called Yan and Maya over, and together they laid the man on the table. Yan placed her hands on the wound, and within minutes the light from her palms faded. The man sat up stunned, thanking her again and again for healing him so quickly. But something felt wrong. The man's hand never opened. Walm had seen enough patients to know that most relaxed the moment the pain left their bodies, but this one kept his fist tight, muscles stiff. He could have been cramping or hiding something. Walm's instincts screamed. He surged forward using an acceleration skill. The patient sprang up, metal glinting between his fingers, a small spiked knuckle aimed straight at Yan. Walm caught his arm mid-swing and crushed it under his boot. Bone cracked. The assassin howled in pain. Walm sarcastically apologized for injuring the man right after he'd been healed. The assassin twisted his wrist, flicking poison darts toward Yan. Walm's sword flashed. Each dart split in midair before hitting the ground. The assassin froze wide-eyed, staring at the blade. It wasn't an ordinary weapon. Forged from a dragonfire core alloyed with enchanted silver, it channeled magic like a living thing. Walm moved in, slicing through the assassin's arm before he could make another move. He shouted for the others to bind and gag him, but by the time they reached him, the man was already convulsing. Poison hidden in his mirrors. Within seconds, he was dead. Yan stood frozen, staring at the corpse. Her voice trembled as she asked, almost to herself, why anyone would do such a thing. Moritz reassured Yan that everyone in the sick bay was on her side. Then he shared something Walm had told him earlier, that healing could be more frightening than any attack. If the people she saved returned to the battlefield to kill again, then she too bore part of that burden. No one was innocent in war, not even a healer. The words struck deep. Yan's eyes welled up, her hands trembling as the weight of what he said sank in. Walm quietly stepped in, announcing that treatments were over for the day, and told both women to come with him. That evening, the two of them sat down for dinner. Maya encouraged Yan to eat, though her appetite was faint. Walm stood nearby, keeping watch. When he noticed a bottle of wine, he told them not to drink since they were underage. Maya blushed and protested that she was 21, while Yan was 16. Both, she insisted, were adults. Walm realized his reaction came from the customs of his old world. He then reached into his magic pouch and pulled out a small pan and a block of cheese. Handing it to them, he suggested melting it to eat with bread. The gesture caught both women off guard. They watched as the hardened soldier offered simple comfort in the form of warm food. Walm urged them not to be shy and even offered some of his meat, recalling something Jose once told him that even on the battlefield, one shouldn't live on a bland diet. As the smell of melted cheese filled the air, Yan finally smiled. The tension in her shoulders eased, and for a brief moment the war outside felt far away. Later, as Walm stepped out into the night, he told them that if they ever needed anything, he'd do what he could to provide it. Alone in the quiet corridor, he muttered to himself that he was a hypocrite, feeling sorry for the girl whose suffering he had helped cause. Inside, Yan watched him go, the flicker of lamplight reflecting in her eyes. Meanwhile, back at the Four-Nation Alliance camp, someone whispered to Hugo that the assassination had failed. Hugo told everyone at the meeting that if they continued like this, they would lose the war without a doubt. Rita spoke back, saying that didn't mean they couldn't win, and she screamed at Hugo for suggesting burning the outer territories of Mjard. Hugo's plan involved the ruthless firebombing of demon territories, intending to drive the demons into the higher empire and wipe out both the empire and its people. And there might be casualties among the people of Mjard, but for Hugo that was a necessary sacrifice. Farius stated that according to prior agreement, any decision would be put to a vote, which Commander Christ of Christ agreed to. Rita, the representative of Mjard, opposed it. The Kingdom of Fious voted yes. Meanwhile, in the demon territory, Risha, the leader of the adventurer party Walm had encountered, was there saving some lives, claiming it was purely for the sake of Mjard. In a sun-drenched field, a young girl happily gathers flowers in her basket. calling out to her mother about the glowing forest and telling her that she is her soul's only reason to live. This peaceful memory is shattered as the young girl is shown in the present, screaming in total desperation for her mother to hurry because they are all going to die. She is soon cornered by a massive, tusked demon with protruding spikes who looms over her with a predatory grin. Despite her frantic pleas for her mother to save her, the girl is seized by the monsters, her cries of agony filling the air as she is brutally overcome by the horde. Far away at the Sarajevo fortress, a frantic soldier informs Commander Berger and his black-haired assistant that Gantria Maryburg has fallen, and that a staggering force of over 90,000 monsters has emerged. The assistant stares in disbelief as he hears that the monsters are flattening the forests and causing mass civilian casualties, while the local security forces are in full retreat. Commander Berger gazes out a window, identifying the catastrophe as the Great Rampage, a phenomenon where demons go on a mindless path of destruction once their territory is sufficiently damaged. He explains to his assistant that while he had seen this happen during Highserk's expansion, it was on a much smaller scale, and this current disaster likely began because the four-nation alliance tampered with the largest demon territory outside the Mjard borders to stall the Highserk victory. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Commander Berger commands his men to abandon Sarajevo fortress immediately. When his assistant questions throwing away territory they fought so hard to conquer, Berger snaps that they must fall back to the former Mjard kingdom border to establish a defensive line, stating that protecting the imperial capital is now the only way to ensure the survival of the Highserk Empire. On the southwest main road of the Fious kingdom, a line of refugees struggles to move forward. Rita falls to the ground in a fit of psychological despair, clutching her hair and screaming that the destruction of the Mjard kingdom is all her fault. She is eventually led away by a companion toward Ruronth Castle, though she remains inconsolable. Inside the castle, King Barristan watches as his guards are torn apart by monsters that have breached the royal chambers. He admits to himself that he never truly saw the people behind the casualty reports and realizes that the strategy devised by his council worked too well. The monsters they intended to drive toward Highserk have instead flooded Mjard and Fious. As the undead close in to consume him, King Barristan laughs with a bloody, manic expression, declaring that Fious is no more and that he will wait for the Highserk kingdom in hell. Elsewhere, Walm sits in a wagon with Moritz, Jan, and Maya, surrounded by a wasteland of corpses. Maya is visibly shaken when Walm reveals that the Four-Nation Alliance intentionally torched a demon zone to trigger this massacre. Walm notes that they are heading toward Dandug Castle where the Imperial Army is rallying, but their conversation is cut short by an ambush of goblin riders. Walm leaps from the wagon with his weapon drawn, calling out to Moritz and Jan that he is counting on them, to which Moritz tells him to leave it to them. Walm prepares to engage the enemy, stating his intent to burn away the vanguards by casting a spell called Ignis Fatuus. As the flames engulf the monsters, Maya shouts that 4 of them are breaking through the line. A random soldier appears who grips his weapon, declaring that he will not let the goblins pass, even as the creatures attempt a coordinated breach. Walm continues his assault, managing to take down more of the wolf-mounted riders until only one remains. He strikes the final wolf down, but is immediately surprised to find that the beast was operating without a goblin rider. Suddenly, a large, heavyset monster drops from above to attack, forcing Walm to block the strike with his spear, while another goblin lunges with a sword. Walm reflects on the unexpected level of combat readiness and training these goblins possess, noting that 12 of them is an unusually small but dangerous number for a horde. After the skirmish, Walm speaks with a soldier who asks if he is the legendary user of Ignis Fatuus. Walm dismissively replies that legendary is an overstatement and asks if the man is there to provide a report. The soldier informs him that a squad escorting Mjard refugees up the road was completely annihilated. Walm thanks him for the intel, though he admits to having a bad feeling about the situation and tells his team to keep an eye on their prisoners. After the skirmish, Walm reunites with Moritz and Jan near their camp. Moritz is the first to speak, calling out to Walm and expressing his relief that he is still alive. Walm acknowledges him and then turns his attention to Jan, who is sitting nearby and appears deeply distressed. He tells her not to worry because they have eliminated the threat, explaining that the prisoners they took confirmed the truth about the ambush. As the group prepares to move, Moritz makes a lighthearted comment, suggesting that if Walm traded his gear for velvet and satin garments, he would look just like a duke. Walm simply sighs in response, muttering to himself that he really should have learned mounted combat, and declines the suggestion of a wardrobe change. The group moves out to inspect the road ahead, where they find a scene of total carnage. Moritz points out that the corpses are not just humans, but that the goblins from the main force were killed as well, and very recently at that. Walm stands over the bodies, contemplating what kind of monster could have attacked the refugees and the goblin riders alike if they weren't fighting each other. A soldier approaches Walm to report that several of the bodies have massive bite marks and mentions finding tracks nearby that show 3 hook claws and 1 rear claw. Walm looks at the tracks and admits that while he has hunted monsters before, he has never seen anything of this scale. He then orders the men to stop investigating and simply move the corpses out of the path, as they are blocking the wagons. As the work begins, the soldier picks up a body and tosses it aside, noting that it feels much lighter than he expected. Walm watches him, reflecting on the lack of time for proper respect or burials, when he suddenly notices something falling from the sky. A corpse of a Highserk cavalryman slams into the ground right in front of him, causing the Walm to look up in shock. High above in the forest canopy, a massive, scaly leg with sharp talons descends as Walm realizes they are under attack. The soldier screams for everyone to prepare for an incoming ambush just as a rampaging wyvern, a powerful dragonkin, bursts through the trees. Walm starts shouting for the group to keep running and to never stop moving, warning them that the creature is so fast it is impossible to predict where it will strike next. Before anyone can react further, the wyvern lunges with blinding speed and devours a fellow soldier instantly, leaving the group horrified as they realize their eyes cannot even track the monster's movements. Walm decides to put an end to this. He casts Ignis Fatuus immediately and hurls it straight at the monster, delivering critical damage, causing it to scream in pain. However, as the smoke settles down, questions arise in his mind that irritates him. His spell didn't deliver much damage as it was mostly failed by the monster's thick scales. He knows he doesn't have much choice, so he decides to get close and attack with a spear. Eventually, he fails to stab through the scales, and just as the beast opens his mouth to eat him, Walm launches another powerful Ignis Fatuus spell, strong enough to melt fricking steel straight into the monster's mouth. However, this only brings the wyvern's complete attention towards Walm, and he realizes he's in danger as he have already used most of his mana. Walm starts looking for an opening, but then suddenly, he and the monster both get engulfed in the flames, leaving behind nothing but smoke. Meanwhile, the soldier standing close by starts to lose his mind. He thinks about his comrade who's dead and remembers him as such a good man. The man hates that his mate has gone, but is relieved to think that it wasn't him. He remembers himself getting ordered by Walm himself to be by Yan's side and protects her at all costs. He can't forget about how Walm is the one who always fights the hardest on the field, and this motivates him to do the same as well. As the soldier grabs his sword and lunges forward to attack the monster. He delivers a blow and soon an opening appears. He immediately tells Walm to take the chance as they won't have many, and Walm smirks. The soldier stabs the wyvern in the eye with a spear and tells Walm to do something as the monster isn't moving at all. Walm takes his stance. He swings his blade and starts channeling magic through it for unleashing various attacks. Soon the air is filled with the painful screams of the pathetic monster. He draws out his sword and suddenly the monster goes on to jump at him. In an instant, the distance closes and Walm swings the blade. He goes on to stab through the scales of the monster and blood starts gushing out of its body. The monster starts moving in severe pain and Walm decides to burn it to ashes, making sure to not let it go. He burns it with his Ignis Fatuus and deals with it in an instant. Meanwhile, Yan is terrified to see that this world has people who are so strong. She can't stop thinking of different groups of men she has seen through the war that have put on a show of realistic strength and capabilities. Suddenly, the soldiers and Moritz bring Walm inside. Even though he killed the monster, he burnt himself along with it. He's severely injured and in extreme pain. Moritz begged Yan to treat him immediately, and Yan and Maya get to work immediately. After the injuries are recognized, Yan says it will hurt, but she can definitely heal Walm. She reminds him the last time she treated him, he was more injured, and he immediately remembers the corpses of his comrades and himself clinging on life with a ray of hope. Yan feels sorry for him, but he tells her not to do so as he is guilty. He feels guilty for killing and burning so many men, and using Yan and Maya as tools as well. Hearing this, Yan realizes that she was wrong when she thought that Walm was just a war maniac who loved killing people. Instead, he's a normal human like her with emotions and blood in his veins. She remembers how he arranged for bath and hygienic living conditions for her in the middle of the war, and even served with the best food he had despite the chaotic situation they were in. She remembers him not letting others disturb her rest and wonders if he's protecting her or trying to win over her. Then she shakes off this thought. She knows Walm is a serious person who deals with right and wrong, just as war demands. Moritz tells Walm to hold on tight as the treatment will be painful, while he also advises Yan to be focused on the treatment only. He looks out the carriage window and informs Walm that the castle of Dandurg is right in front of their eyes. Walm enters the grand gates of Dandurg Castle, observing the heavy influx of refugees carrying their meager belongings through the stone corridors. As he looks out over a balcony at the massive crowds gathered in the courtyard, he questions why so many people are settling here despite the fact that hundreds of thousands of monsters are approaching. He proceeds deep into the fortress, passing through a guarded doorway to meet with Brigadier General Sigismund of the Highserk Imperial Army. Walm identifies himself as Guard Captain Walm and reports that his squad has successfully transported their charge from Sarajevo Fortress. Sigismund acknowledges Walm's efforts and mentions hearing that Walm killed a rampaging wyvern single-handedly. Walm humbly clarifies that he only managed to cling to the beast and burn it while receiving support from allied forces. This modesty causes Sigismund to erupt into a fit of laughter, finding the feat unprecedented and praising the decision to send Walm to the front lines. The general informs Walm that they are critically short-handed and orders his squad to continue guarding the healing mages, though he grants them a day of rest to recover their strength. Before leaving, Walm asks if the high number of refugees might hinder combat operations. Sigismund reacts with a sharp, piercing gaze, noting that many people simply do not want to leave their homeland, and tells Walm not to worry about it for now. As Walm walks away, he remains suspicious, wondering if the military is intentionally using the massive population as bait to lure the monsters specifically to the castle. He eventually finds Yan in a large infirmary hall where she is exhausted from her work. She laments that she lacks enough magic to help everyone, but Walm reassures her that healing 100 people is already an excellent feat. When Gan mentions they are short on medicine and boiled water, Walm offers to help. He uses his magic to heat a large pot of water, surprising Yan by revealing he has 2 elemental attributes. He jokes that in his old squad, his water attribute made his comrades treat him like a walking water bottle. Yan becomes quiet, and Walm notices her visible fatigue from mana depletion. He warns her that pushing herself until she collapses would defeat the purpose of her work and asks if she should stop for the day. Yan insists she is fine, though she looks visibly drained while they sit by the steaming pot. Walm tries helping out, but Maya approaches asking him to stop, while Yan watches from the other side of the vessel. Walm agrees, though he privately notes that stopping Maya would have required dragging her from the room by force. Maya tells him not to overdo it and instructs him to rest immediately if he feels dizzy or nauseous, explaining that it will take time for his magic to recover. Looking at Yan and Maya, Walm reflects on the lack of assassination risk in their current situation. Moritz stands near the pot and remarks that he never would have guessed Walm possessed a water attribute. Walm explains that he acquired some while leaving the Sarajevo fortress, noting that the decision was made to abandon the fortress and discard luggage that could not be carried, even items intended for high-ranking officers. He mentions that his magic bag happened to be open where those things were thrown away, which Moritz finds amusing. The group gathers for a meal in a large hall where a whole roasted orc head is served on a platter. Walm stares at the dish in shock, while Moritz laughs and says the sight brings back memories. Walm admits that while people eat monsters during food shortages on the battlefield, he had always managed to find decent food or engage in bartering. Moritz reveals that he used to eat poisonous insects and monsters day and night to strengthen his poison resistance skill. Hearing this, Walm realizes that Moritz is a fellow countryman from his original world. He watches as Yan calmly eats a piece of the meat, acting as if it is nostalgic, which prompts Walm to decide to share in the suffering. One of the soldiers presents a plate of orc tongue and nose to Walm, calling them especially delicious parts. Walm looks at the offering with a grimace, wondering what is wrong with his own expression as he stalls for time. He eventually takes a bite, surprised to find that the meat has a firm yet tender elasticity and a saltiness that enhances the flavor. He reluctantly admits to himself that it is delicious. As the meal continues, the group sits together at the long table. Walm eventually stands and tells everyone to hurry up, eat, and go to sleep because the real work starts the next day. Yan and Maya share a smile as they talk, and Walm looks on with a softened expression before the scene shifts to the following morning, where a long line of people begins to move out through the fortress gates and into the rugged terrain beyond. Walm stands atop the fortress walls of Edinburgh Castle and questions a subordinate about the status of the outer perimeter. He is informed that Ben's squad is currently engaged with goblin riders and receives word on the division of labor and combat duties for the refugees below. Looking down at the crowded courtyard, he points out the smoke from the field kitchen to the displaced people. Walm observes the suspicious nature of the castle and the surrounding great rampage occurring at 3 main points in Miyard. Sensing something concerning, he tells the guards he is stepping out for a bit and descends to the gate. He commands a large group of approaching people to halt and asks what brings them there. He recognizes the newcomers as adventurers and confronts a blond man named El. El admits he is well aware that he is asking for what is convenient, but he begs for Walm's help. Walm remains cold, questioning El's pride and reminding him that he fled the great rampage to seek help from sworn enemies. He mocks El's shallow sense of patriotism and asks if El truly thinks bowing his head will be enough for forgiveness after adventurers like him killed Highserk soldiers from behind. Walm places a hand on his sword and asks if he should take El's head instead to satisfy the debt. El and his companions are frozen in shock as Walm declares that, as the knight in charge of the gate, he cannot trust soldiers who surrendered or adventurers who stab others in the back. A woman named Emmy interjects, pleading that they have no homeland left and are being chased by the great rampage. Walm ignores her and tells them to fight again or go elsewhere. El silences Emmy and his other companions, insisting that he will do what is needed to settle the matter. Despite the protests of his friends, El offers his head to Walm. Instead of drawing his blade, Walm delivers a powerful, bloody punch to El's face that sends him reeling to the ground. Walm tells the dazed man to stand up, remarking that his battered face is a better look than his severed head would be. El looks up in confusion, blood dripping from his nose as Walm orders the entire group to line up. Walm stares them down, stating that he hopes this outcome satisfies him for now. He warns the group that there will be no second chances. If they betray them, he will cut their tendons and throw them from the castle walls. As the adventurers bow low in the dirt in a gesture of submission, Walm welcomes them to Edinburgh Castle at the end of Miyard. El, lying face down, feebly thanks him as the gate finally opens to receive them. 5 days after Walm and the others arrive, the bells of Edinburgh Castle ring out as a guard screams for everyone to evacuate because the main stream of the great rampage is coming. Soldiers scramble to their assigned positions while others shout in shock at the sight of the main horde, describing it as a black horizon. On the wall, a commander tells his men not yet and to hold them a little longer before finally screaming for them to begin the attack. A massive volley of arrows and magic is released, but the soldiers soon realize the monsters are trying to bore through and are piling up corpses to make a foothold to climb. A soldier yells that it is impossible because they don't have enough mages, but a commander orders the mage squad to use volley fire and not let the monsters cling to the wall. El watches the great rampage approach with a grim look, muttering that it is like throwing pebbles into the ocean and that he cannot stop them. When an archer screams that they are out of arrows and monsters appear directly above them, El activates a body acceleration technique to strike down a winged beast, though other soldiers are thrown from the battlements. Walm suddenly appears and yells for everyone to get down if they don't want to burn alive, unleashing a massive blast of fire. A soldier identifies him as the rumored Ignis Fatuus and calls him Guardian Chief Walm, while another notes how lucky they are to have him. Walm then leaps from the wall, causing the soldiers to scream in shock as he falls. He lands among the creatures, remarking to himself that fighting monsters is at least straightforward, and releases a wave of Ignis Fatuus that incinerates the front line. The soldiers watch from above, cheering that the great rampage is pulling back, as Walm jumps back up to the castle wall and sheathes his blade. Walm stands alone looking out over the battlefield, noting that the Ignis Fatuus is growing and calculating that at this output, he could probably fire it once more if he pushed himself. He looks down at the scorched remains of the monsters as soldiers rush toward him, shouting for Guardian Chief Walm and calling out, "Sir Knight." In relief, Walm turns away from the edge of the wall and simply asks them to let him rest a bit. Nearby, the soldiers exchange hopeful glances, with one remarking that with Lord Walm there, they might actually hold the line, while another exclaims that there is hope now. Elle watches from a distance, looking over the wall with a stunned expression and whispering that it is amazing. Below the battlements, the remnants of the enemy are consumed by the lingering Ignis Fatuus, their dark forms silhouetted against the intense light. Two soldiers observe the destruction, with one describing Walm as incredible and the other agreeing, admitting they never knew he was this powerful. Elle looks on with a weary but relieved smile, thinking to himself, "Thank goodness. He's on our side," as the sound of the magical flames continues to sizzle in the air. Walm lies exhausted on the wooden floor of a dimly lit room, his eyes barely staying open as he reflects on finally being able to sleep. His rest is short-lived when a white-haired soldier kneels beside him, offering an apology for the disturbance and delivering an urgent report. The soldier informs Walm that Brigadier General Sigismund is requesting his immediate presence, prompting Walm to stand and acknowledge that he will report to the general at once. Walm makes his way through the castle to a balcony where Sigismund is standing. Sigismund acknowledges the arrival of Guard Captain Walm, who offers an apology for his delay before asking for an update on the front line. Sigismund explains that while they have managed to repel the monsters attacking day and night, the troops are exhausted and running low on arrows and throwing weapons. He notes that their survival currently depends entirely on the mage soldiers suppressing fire. When Walm asks how long they can hold, Sigismund estimates they have 2 or 3 days at most. He describes how the monsters are growing smarter by digging tunnels and building crude battering rams to breach the walls. Sigismund warns that if the monsters scale the walls, close-quarters combat will begin and casualties will skyrocket. He mentions that while the communication line to the homeland is still intact for now, they must abandon Castle Danderg and plan to halt the monsters' advance in the former Kanoa region. Sigismund reveals that secret preparations for a withdrawal are already underway. Walm asks if the secrecy is to avoid confusion, and Sigismund confirms this, stating that they will begin a full, simultaneous retreat at dawn the day after tomorrow. To facilitate this, they are increasing the ratio of prisoners and volunteers assigned to the wall corridors, effectively switching out their own country's soldiers for Mjard troops. Walm is visibly unsettled, asking what will happen to the Mjard soldiers and refugees crammed inside the castle. Sigismund regrettably explains that those who cannot move in time will have to barricade themselves inside and wait for the great rampage to pass. Walm challenges this, suggesting they should be killing the monsters instead of waiting, as the castle gates are too narrow for everyone to make it through. Sigismund counters that objections and dissatisfaction are not Walm's alone, but fighting to the last man would be a futile sacrifice given the heavy losses they have sustained in just 3 days. He explains the plan is to use attractive bait to lure the monsters and whittle down their forces to buy time with disposable pawns. Walm realizes that the bait consists of the majority of the Mjard refugees and that their rescue is not part of the plan. Sigismund issues a direct order, noting he has heard Walm is loyal to orders, while Walm silently compares Sigismund's cold pragmatism to Berger. Sigismund emphasizes the need for confidentiality and instructs Walm to devote himself to maintaining communication lines, suggesting they might save a small number of Mjard refugees if things go well. Walm grips his helmet tightly and complies with the order. Walm walks through the castle grounds, passing by the refugees huddled around small fires. He looks at a man holding a child and realizes that most of the people he just passed will be left behind at dawn the day after tomorrow. His thoughts are interrupted by a commotion among the soldiers on the walls. He wonders if they have heard about the planned operation, but as he reaches the battlements, he sees the soldiers cheering because the monsters have pulled back. The men celebrate what they believe is a miracle victory, but Walm looks out toward the horizon with a look of dread. The soldiers notice a dark shape in the distance and realize that the mountain is moving. Confusion turns to terror as they see the massive shape is on fire and realize it is not a mountain at all. A colossal dragon, a ruler of the ecosystem not sighted for 150 years, looms over the landscape. The soldiers identify it as one of the 5 great dragons, the Flame Emperor Dragon. Panic erupts on the wall as men scream for headquarters to be contacted and ask if they should retreat immediately. They stare in shock at the creature, questioning what good their ballistae could possibly do against such a beast, while Walm stands paralyzed as his heart races at the sight of the approaching dragon. Walm shouts at the top of his lungs for everyone to get away from the castle, his face contorted with urgency as a group of armored knights looks on in confusion, questioning his frantic behavior. He repeats the warning with desperate intensity, his eyes wide as he screams that they cannot stay there because he can sense an enormous, overwhelming magical power surging nearby. High above, a massive, jagged-toothed creature begins to glow, its mouth peeling open to release a devastating, blinding beam of energy that the terrified onlookers identify as dragon breath. The blast strikes the castle's stone walls with surgical precision, causing the massive structures to shatter into jagged rubble and collapse. People are thrown violently from the battlements as the beam slices clean through the fortifications, leaving behind a massive, smoldering gap where the towers once stood. Walm stands amidst the rising smoke and ruins, staring at the total destruction of the command post and the surrounding walls with bloodshot, shocked eyes. He watches as the massive, shell-backed creature begins to move away through the water, its hulking form heading directly toward the imperial capital. The survivors, covered in dust, stare in silent disbelief at the scale of the retreating monster while Walm collapses to his knees, clutching his head in his hands and crying out in raw frustration, asking why the world is so cruel and what is happening to them. He begins calling out names into the chaos, searching for Jan, Maya, and Moritz among the dazed survivors who are milling about the wreckage in a state of shock. A knight watches him with concern and asks where he is going as Walm suddenly breaks into a sprint, leaving the rubble behind. He ignores the pleas of the wounded soldiers lying among the bricks, his breathing heavy and his focus entirely on reaching his destination. He eventually reaches the clinic and finds it standing, expressing a moment of breathless relief that the building has not been damaged. Walm pushes through a crowded hallway of people, his hand gripping the doorframe as he tells them to step back so he can enter. He stands at the entrance of a large room filled with rows of occupied beds, noting the suffocatingly strong smell of death hanging in the air. He looks around the room frantically, his face sweating and his heart racing as he pleads for his companions to be among the living. Walm enters the clinic and finds Jan, who calls out to him with wide, sweat-beaded eyes, asking if he is safe. He breathes a sigh of relief that she is unharmed, explaining that he managed to survive the blast by being positioned behind the gate tower. Walm immediately begins to strategize, stating he will gather the soldiers who can still move to begin an immediate evacuation, though he privately notes his lack of experience commanding such a large group. He grimly assesses that the command post is burned to the ground and the walls are lost, warning that monsters will attack soon and make the escape route impossible. Jan clenches her fist and insists she will protect the escape route, because the current position is already lost, prompting Walm to call her idea ridiculous and ask if she has a death wish. She shouts back with tears in her eyes that the country doesn't matter, as they are people, and she wants to save them. Standing her ground despite her trembling, she admits she is terrified of swords and magic and desperately wants to live, but she simply cannot abandon those who cannot move due to injuries. Walm looks down in silence, reflecting on how he has always been the one to abandon others for the sake of duty, and that the hands of the clock cannot turn back. He observes the battered soldiers and the blood-stained floor, concluding that with the chain of command gone and the brigade half destroyed, a full retreat is their best choice. The surviving soldiers, looking exhausted and grim, turn to him and ask what they should do since no battalion commanders or higher-ranking officers survived. Walm envisions a weeping, wounded Maya pleading for help, which causes his eyes to widen as he tells himself to stop thinking and not cling to illusions. Snapping out of his hesitation, he questions what can a weak human even do in such a desperate situation. He gets surrounded by various opinions, some suggesting evacuations while others questioning the construct of command of chain. Walm stays calm, he clenches his sword and grits his teeth, declaring with a fierce expression that he will seal the broken walls, even if it is only done roughly. Raising his blade high into the air, he commands everyone to follow him, regardless of whether they are militia or regular soldiers.